What was the most cringe moment at your D&D table? This one guy didn't understand the premise of organized play, so he spent zero time helping with the mission and took 20 minutes to tell us about other awesome games he had played instead of playing the game in front of him that ended when the store closed. I DM'd for a group where one of the girls was convinced the entire game was for her enjoyment. She'd throw fits when the rest of the party didn't want to do what she did and constantly tried to split up from them. It eventually culminated in a very awkward temper tantrum when she refused to go with her party and ended up dying alone. Aw, mine's as vanilla as heck compared to some of these. It was the guy who smelled like cat pee. I was sat next to him. Why the frick is there always a cat pee guy at game shops? So back in high school, we had ourselves a D&D club. It consisted of myself and 5 friends. My senior year, we had a new kid join us who I'm going to call Nate. Nate was a very smart, very nerdy kid who was used to doing things mostly by the book. He had a campaign he wanted to DM, and our normal DM was happy to let him. Very early on in the campaign, another kid asked to join, who I'm going to call Joey. Joey was not the brightest. I don't know what was going on with him, but it just took him forever to get crap done. He began to roll up a character, but because he was frequently late, absent, and super slow, it took him probably a dozen sessions to finish. He had to change things constantly because we'd be higher level, or he didn't write it down, or he lost his sheet. Every single step of character creation required one of us to basically do it for him. Eventually, though, he finished his character, who was an arcane archer. Nate shoehorned him into the story by having us stumble upon him in the dungeon we were in. He was finally going to get to play with us. We left the room we found him in and proceeded to the next area. We opened a door and we were immediately faced with a beholder. It uses its death ray eye on a random party member, which happens to be Joey. Joey rolls a 3 on his saving throw and Joey dies within 2 minutes of playing, having done nothing but fail to roll a fortitude save. Now, all of us are thinking, Nate, for the love of God, just make something up that allows him to still be alive, even unconscious. Unfortunately, Nate isn't psychic, and as I said before, he's very by the book. Joey is dead and must roll a new character. It was so unbelievably awkward and painful. We still regret and talk about the mistake of not forcing Nate to let Joey live over 10 years later. The rules exist to help people have fun, not to destroy it. Whoopsie doodle. Well, that's the way the dice go sometimes. I do think that if you really wanted to get him in the game, you probably could have done more and done it earlier, but I guess that's the benefit of hindsight. Rest in peace, Joey's character. My good friend decided he wanted to do a sandbox campaign of his own making. We have the first session at my house, and one of the guys that showed up was a friend of a friend that neither of us knew very well. The session got started early, and already I was getting a dillweed vibe from this one guy. He's messing with other people's gear when they're asleep, calling out false alarms while on watch, and generally just being a jerk. One of the storylines involved investigating a murder. We arrived at the murder scene, and there was a charred corpse. We asked some questions and the group wanted to leave. I picked an obvious action of investigating and searching the corpse. Among some clues, I find a +1 ring of defense. Being an unarmored monk, I keep it. Dillweed wants to roll for the loot. No, we wouldn't even have the ring if I hadn't decided to search the corpse, and it's an item I can use. Sorry, I know your wizard could also find it useful, but it's my find, and it's not like I found a magical double-headed battle axe and decided to keep it and not give it to the barbarian. So, nighttime comes, and I pass a note to the DM that I'm not sleeping during Dillweed's watch, but will feign sleep. Sure enough, during his watch, he tries to steal the ring off me. I'm starting to get angry at this point, so I put the ring in my prison wallet. The DM is getting amused and rules that since the ring is still technically equipped while in my keister, I still get the bonus. Dillweed is incensed. We make it back to town during a festival. We participated in some games, during which I jokingly made a pass at a lusty barmaid. Dillweed uses a glamour spell to make him appear later as the same barmaid and asks me to join her/him in the pantry. At this point, things are getting out of hand for a fun-filled D&D game as the glamoured wizard/barmaid falls to his or her knees and begins to go south of the border on me. During a perception check, I feel fingers roaming towards my butt and realize it's the frickin' wizard trying to get that frickin' ring. So I stunning striked him and he burning hands to me and crits. He takes me to 0 hit points, takes the ring and leaves me to bleed out in the pantry. Didn't tell the party, they later found the body and lo and behold, Dillweed has a shiny new ring on. So, the party murdered him and buried me with the ring. That was the only session of that game. No one wanted to play after that and we never invited Dillweed back from then on. We've played many other sessions, but none stand out as that disturbing or weird. The DM would get drunk and start hitting on me, calling me by his sister's name the whole time. I guess I sort of look like her? This happened every time he got drunk, which was often. I played one session with a bunch of people who had never played before. Most of them were cool, but one guy who was playing a wizard discovered that some low-level spell he had, prestidigitation, allowed him to clean or soil objects up to a certain size. He spent the rest of the session trying to soil everyone and everything we encountered. It was funny the first couple of times, but it got annoying real fast. These kind of in-jokes can be so good in a long-term campaign. We had a bard who pretty much only knew mend as his spell, so at least once or twice per session, someone would rip or burn their clothes in a fight, and he'd pipe up excitedly, "Oh, I cast mend!" Lots of fun when it happened a couple of times. Not fun 20 times in one session. I saw a guy in his mid-20s cry and storm out of the room because his character got killed because he was doing something stupid. And he did get some crappy rolls, like a full-on child hissy fit over a D&D character death. He never wanted to play after that. First time playing, approximately 2003. We were in a cave, my turn came up, and I said in my best George W. Bush impersonation, "Let's search the cave for weapons of mass destruction." I was told to leave. I went back to playing Icewind Dale by myself. My DM is a bit loose on taking suggestions on things that don't impact the campaign but make us roleplay. My dwarf was attacking some random bandit, and he had to move under a beam and hit the bandit with his hammer. I rolled a 1. The DM said I ran under the beam but raised my hammer too early, hitting the beam and falling prone, to which the cleric replied, "And he pooped his pants." That was only the first time my dwarf crapped himself. Once a buddy of mine set me up on a date with a girl he knew. We hit it off and started dating. Turns out that buddy didn't expect us to hit it off, he was just trying to ice her a bit while he was off dating someone else. When he found out we were actually dating, he flipped out. He was my DM. The next session he tried to kill my character. The other players wouldn't have it, and it turned into a weird shouting match about betrayal and debaggery. Happened last week in my online game. Someone got upset after asking them to mute their mic while eating and stormed out, derailing the session. So, most of these are about people reacting to insane or at the very least unsociable behavior. This one flips it on its head slightly by being a very insane reaction to a very sociable request, so well done for that. I was deployed alone to an army unit I was unfamiliar with. I tried to make friends there, and one of the things the guys could do was play D&D. I'd never played, but I asked if I could and they set me up. So here I am, walking through an imaginary cave with literal and figurative strangers. I don't know these guys, but everyone seems level-headed. That is until I get to a cliff face that's too dark to see. My character has a torch, so I light it up, and the table frickin' explodes. I must have missed something because everyone turned on me. One guy got up and threw a chair. He frickin' rolls to douse the torch and calls me a jerk. I'm confused and I say sorry, and we carry on, but every move I made, they all gave me a distrustful look. It was a long deployment and tensions were high. It was my first and last time playing D&D. Some girl we were playing with insisted on having her character be the victim of the unspeakable act by one of the enemies. It was very uncomfortable. In one of our games, 2 of the player characters attempted to commit the unspeakable act on a third character. I say attempted, honestly they might have succeeded, I didn't bother to pay attention after a while. The third player was visibly uncomfortable with this, as was everyone else except the 2 players and the DM, who wouldn't stop the scene on account of, "They're just role-playing, guys," even though we'd literally begged him to intercede. I've never played with either of the 2 players or the DM again. Whenever someone just disobeys the rules they agreed to, it's so awkward to have that conversation. I used to DM, and one of my stipulations was no evil player characters. I've just seen it lead to too much character in fighting in the past, and in-character fighting usually leads to real-life arguing, so no, just a rule I have when I DM. One guy said he agreed, and then rolled up with the most evil, quote, neutral character I've ever seen. Sorry, but disguising yourself as someone and then cutting her face off while she's still alive so you can assume her identity is evil. I don't care what it says on your character alignment, Evan. There were a lot of evil things he did, like torturing, unprovoked murder of innocents, and other stuff, but this is where the rest of the party finally turned on him. He fought it for a while, but eventually he brought a new character the next session. I have a lot of stories, both about my players and the times I effed up, but I'll start with a short one. One of my players said, "I just don't understand why no one trusts me." I rounded on him. Sneaky Pete. You're in a Game of Thrones RPG, and you named your character Sneaky Pete. The last time I played D&D was Christmas of 2006, if I recall correctly. My old group hadn't played in a while, life had gone on, people had gotten jobs, got married, and had kids. None of us were in that place anymore where we could spend entire weekends having marathon RPG sessions like the old days. I decided it'd be fun to run a one-shot game, and came up with the idea to tell a simple story. It was more or less The Grinch Stole Christmas, but the Grinch was a band of goblins. I'd prepared a cool little dungeon crawl, NPCs with clues. It was just a neat little module meant to take a few hours to complete. Then I went online to Chessex and ordered a customized set of red and green dice for every player who came. The D6 said Merry Christmas 2006, with a little Christmas tree in it. All of our old players were invited, including significant others who were new to the group. I wanted everyone to have fun. It was just going to be this light-hearted, simple dungeon. Day of the game comes around, the party meets in the tavern, and a little kid character bursts in crying that their solstice celebration stuff was missing. And the party basically responds, sucks to be you, kid, now let's get drunk. The drinking started up in real life. Players basically didn't give a damn about playing the game and kept saying they were trying to seduce people or do dumb stuff until I just gave up. I spent a lot of effort trying to do this fun little thing, and the group took a collective dump on it. It really bothered me at the time, and I basically gave up on D&D after that. Also was the last time some of those friends were invited to something I did. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I played while stationed on a ship, and because the group was co-ed, we had to host the game on the mess decks. There was a guy working the mess decks who had a huge crush on me and was super fundamentally Christian. One day when I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the game, he stopped me on my way back, grabbed my hand, and prayed for my soul because I was playing, quote, a devil's game. I yanked my hand back and said, I appreciate the concern, but never ever do that again. And I walked away. Thankfully, he didn't try it again and was only on TAD, the temporary assigned duty that every new sailor must complete. So he was sent back to his division a month later, and I never saw him again. You dodged a bullet there. An active duty fundamentalist would likely propose after about 6 seconds of eye contact. Especially when a coworker made a joke about me being a virgin in front of him. I let it slip to one person after a few drinks and port, and 24 hours later, all 120 people in my division knew about it. After that, he did ask me if I was interested in a relationship, and I told him I was flattered, but we wouldn't be compatible at all. In fact, he never once asked me to pray with him or even preach to me until he saw me playing D&D. To be honest, I think he only did it because he was actually truly worried for my soul due to his upbringing, but left me alone when I asked him not to do that again, so I do have to give him some credit for that. A member of the party spent 20 minutes trying to seduce everything in the room. The DM wouldn't have it, and he wouldn't stop trying. Fricking bards. Look, I've got to say that this is pretty standard for any D&D group with a bard in the party. I don't know why the DM didn't expect that. Sincerely, the guy who loves playing as a bard. Our next commenter will also testify to the validity of this assertion. I seduced a dragon, so it doesn't always end up making things awkward. That dragon became my wife, and she helped me through the rest of the campaign. She died protecting me. I miss my dragon wife. A DM took a comedic moment too far and basically turned an entire adventure into a send-up of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. A mysterious alchemist character who was supposed to be a recurring villain practically turned into Dr. Frankenfurter. Jokes naturally creep into a campaign, but I've always felt when you start writing them in that it can be a bit too much. Months later, when that group had fizzled, I had an opportunity to view the DM's notes, and what that adventure could have been before the jokes was something awesome. This was more than 15 years ago. Climbing up the inside of a large grain silo at night, torches in hand, we ascended towards the treasure we thought was at the top. All of a sudden, there's a noise. I draw both my swords, a player exclaims. Are you sure? The DM confirms. With a subtle nod from the players, suddenly the DM gets an excited look in his eye. Everyone roll a luck check, and I mean everyone. A cry of surprise goes around the table. What? Why? Everyone's exclaiming nearly in unison. Danver drew his swords. Yeah, and? Danver was holding a torch. If he draws his swords, I have to assume he dropped his torch in the silo full of very dry grain, which is now a roaring inferno. Only one of us survived. Playing Numenera, a role-playing game similar to D&D but taking place in the far distant future. where ancient tech is considered magic and there's all sorts of incomprehensible crap lying in trash heaps or buried in ruins. A player found this one thing, a one-time use blob of neon blue goop, that when spread on the stump of a severed appendage grows a bright blue replacement limb. You roll a d6 and on a 1 it's half the original size, and on a 6 twice the original size. Any other result and it's just normal. This is obviously meant to be a replacement for a lost arm or leg with a little extra weirdness and risk to keep things interesting. So, naturally, the PC cuts off his own manhood, smeared the goo on the stump, and grew a foot-long, bright blue trouser monster. The Grape Dwarf, without the G. Okay, so this was my first session of D&D. It's sadly probably relevant that I was the only woman at the table playing the only female character, a human rogue. Due to plot reasons, we ended up taking a job to clear a mine of monsters. It became apparent that this wasn't going to go well when the dwarf, who had been quiet up until this point, started describing his combat actions with a little more relish than was strictly necessary. We ran into a small group of goblin civilians fleeing from us, and the dwarf announced that he was going to murder them all and have his way with their corpses, I think. It was a while ago. Anyway, the unspeakable act was involved. The paladin took issue with this and managed to hold him back, allowing the group, including the goblin children, to escape. The dwarf was unhappy with this. We proceeded to the lower levels of the mine, where it turned out there was a group of giant spiders, and naturally I managed to roll a critical 1, getting stuck in some webbing. The dwarf's player looked me dead in the eye and announced, "I have my way with her." Immediate silence followed. No one seemed to quite know what to say to this. The DM was the first to speak, saying, "Right, I'm going to say the last 5 minutes never happened." Everyone agreed that this was probably the best thing to do. The dwarf didn't like this, and after a few protests that he was just role-playing his character, he sulked in the corner for the rest of the session. I don't think he ever came back. It sure was an interesting first session. I still like D&D though. I mean, if you just sweep the online forums, this story is unfortunately far from unheard of, particularly with female players being the victim. Also common is the DM trying to get female players into compromising situations with orcs or some other nonsense. One particular story was really upsetting, as the girl in question had been the victim of that crime in real life before, so she really wasn't okay with that. She ended up leaving, and everyone was justifiably furious at the GM. If you're a GM and you try to incorporate that crap into your game without the meta consent of the players, you're a fricking scumbag. A player was being a jerk to my wife who was new to playing. It wasn't just like his and her characters not being compatible, he was outwardly doing and saying little things to make her mad in real life to where she didn't want to play anymore. I forgot what it was, but he said something and I, the DM, blew the F up at him. Most everyone else was outside smoking, but they heard and were like, "What the frick was that about?" Cue much silence and uncomfortableness. Oddly enough, he stopped and they're actually good friends now, so yelling works sometimes? Huh. Well, good on you for sticking up for her. I assume that you were prepared to have them stop being your friends for your wife's sake, but it seems like you got a nice bonus reward for taking your stand. Cool. I had this one player who would cheat all the damn time. He'd pre-roll dice until he got the number he wanted and then just pointed it after moving his hand like he'd just rolled when his turn came up. He refused to roll characters in front of everyone because anyone watching me is bad luck. He'd constantly change his mind and switch around things on the character several sessions in because he thought the guy wasn't min-maxed enough. He insisted on keeping his character sheet between sessions, and the character would mysteriously get stronger between every session. And that's ignoring common things like using information he couldn't possibly have, by buying the module we were playing through and memorizing it. Things like that. The time in question was a session we were playing Middle-earth role-playing, or some similar sounding system. It was a D100 system, so you'd roll 2 10-sided dice for just about everything. The DM's girlfriend, now wife, had joined for the first time, and she was a very nice person, bubbly and funny. She mostly understood the rules and played along. I noticed early on that when it was her turn, she'd roll her 2 10-sided dice, and whichever one was higher was the 10-sided dice for that roll, and the rest of the rolls that round. And next round she'd repeat the process, often using the 10s and 1s die to change between rounds. Small-time cheating, but I was used to so much worse, and she was being moderately discreet about it at least. And then the cheater called her out. He pointed out she was ensuring she always got the highest roll to start her round, and it wasn't fair the DM was letting her cheat like that just because she was his girlfriend. She looked a little shocked at being caught and hurt at how he called her out. So, the rest of us started calling out the cheating we'd seen from him that session. "Oh, you mean like last round when you rolled until you had 97 and then just pointed to it? Didn't you just get firebolt? How could you have got so many points in it? Did you just erase the ones from Waterbolt and transfer them over? You know that isn't in the rules, right? It's funny. I don't remember you losing that magical staff with all of those bonuses. DM, can you check to see if that's really what the Wyram had last session? The game got a lot quieter in some portions of the table after that. Was building up a good relationship with an NPC over the past year, finally roleplayed the part where I asked her to marry me. The DM fell to pieces on me. Turns out he'd just learned a week prior his wife wanted a divorce. Ouch. Chunky dude with long blonde hair proceeded to unbutton his shirt, go in front of the fan and made a Batman pose with his shirt as the cape, coating the entire room in the smell of his BO. I've been trying to weasel my way out of going back ever since. I was the DM, and one player was playing as a barbarian, and he decided to try and intimidate some goblins, and rolled a natural 1. So, instead of intimidating them, I decided he seduced them. I and the others had a great laugh, but he was having none of it and slaughtered them. We then made him feel bad for killing the loves of his life. Maybe not exactly what you were going for, but it was fun. 2 players kept being wildly flirty and suggestive with their characters, which I guess could just be the name of this video, but anyway. He kept hitting on her and she was very open to it. It was very uncomfortable and creepy for the rest of us. She was the DM's wife, by the way. What's the best "welcome to the real world" moment that hit a spoilt rich kid? I grew up with rich kids and still keep in touch with a few of them. One guy's father owned the most prestigious law firm in town. He said his life changed the moment he called his father from jail the second time it happened. His father said, "Well, sorry to hear you got arrested, good luck," and then hung up. He said getting locked back into his cell was the singular moment that completely turned his life around. I knew this rich kid from high school that went off to college and partied every single night. His parents found out that he was basically failing all of his classes, so they secretly drove up early one Saturday morning with a spare set of keys to the car they'd bought him and just drove off with the car. Somewhat distant relatives spent all of his university years and 20s partying hard with the $100 to $120K allowance his rich company-owning father gave him each year. He'd travel the world each year going to Bali, Thailand, Europe, every year Oktoberfest, just rampaging. And at 32 or so, he decided to settle an upscale ski resort area of the US and open a business with his hot gold digger fiancée. When he went to transfer his money to his US bank account, he noticed it only came to a few $1,000s. Angrily asked the bank worker why she hadn't transferred the entire amount, only to be told that that was the entire amount. His father had cut him off without saying anything, and he just hadn't noticed. Absolute flatline. Rich guy in our college dorm thought he was untouchable because his dad was some NFL player from the 90s and had not blown all of his money yet. He'd get freshman girls blackout drunk and then film himself doing the deed with them, and then show all of his buddies the next day or so. Well, one buddy was not as close as he thought and went to the residential advisor, who then went to the campus police and then the real police. It was a fun night watching the parking lot fill up with the bored cops on duty that night and haul his butt out of the dorms while they went and gathered his evidence. Never saw him after that night. This took place near the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, because I remember going to class on Monday and his dorm was empty and being cleaned out by the housekeeping staff. Yuck. Well deserved. Look, say what you will about most people born with silver spoons in their butts, most of them don't seem to do this. But don't worry, there's plenty of other things to be annoyed about them for. That one Instagram model who got caught on video talking crap to a security guard at VidCon, not only did the guard stand his ground and not let him in because he wasn't famous enough to be given a pass and too rich to just buy one, but once the internet saw the video, the guard ended up having more followers than the kid. My classmate in college failed his course, partied for a year with daddy's money, never studied, ever. The thing is, inheriting his father's construction company, 2 quarries, a fleet of trucks and equipment, depended on him manning up and passing the class. All he had to do was learn the basics of mechanical diagnostic and repair and be set for life. I had a roommate my freshman year of college that came from an incredibly rich oil family from the Middle East. I remember him having the hardest time adjusting to not having someone else prepare him food. I remember waking up one morning and going to the kitchen and seeing him try to eat eggs and toast he had just prepared himself. He asked me how I normally prepare fried eggs because his tasted really crunchy. Turns out he'd just cracked the egg whole into the pan and prepared it shell and all. I couldn't stop laughing, but I felt really bad for the guy. He was actually a pretty good dude. It was an interesting semester helping him learn how to live providing for himself. I knew a guy in high school who bragged that he didn't have to pay attention in school because, get this, his grandfather was vice president of the corporation that supplied the cardboard for cereal boxes for General Mills. Real gravy train, you know. Last I checked, I've since deleted Facebook, he was still working at Best Buy 5 years after high school. It was the same job he'd had in high school too. My best moment was when I got hired by a pair of Woodside, California parents to transition their horrible 18-year-old into the realities of real life, something that evaded both of them. My first action was to take away his platinum limitless credit cards. He threw a tantrum that lasted several days. "Where am I going to get the money?" "Well, you get a job. My parents will fire you." They didn't. When he realized that boundaries and budgets had been set in stone and that he not only had to pay the bills, the rent, but taxes too, he headed straight to college to wait out the next 4 years. He's still a complete jerk, but at least he has a job and an education now. Okay, how does one get into your line of work? That sounds really fun. I was the nanny while working through my PDD, so I came to it indirectly. There's a whole workforce of people who do this. It's word of mouth and next door. My favourite moment had to be on the BBC when Prince Andrew got the crap kicked out of him for an hour about his sordid deeds. Well deserved, but if it was a really just world, he'd be in prison. One of my college roommates told his parents the trip we were planning, that they were paying for, was $400 more expensive than it was so that he could buy a really nice substance-smoking apparatus. In addition, they basically paid for everything he wanted. He had their credit card and ordered food on it at least once daily. He'd make $50 purchases off the card all the time. Long story short, they found out he lied about the cost of the trip. For whatever reason, they still paid and let him go, but after the trip, he just couldn't use their card anymore. This guy acted like he lived the hardest life of all time after that, but eventually sucked it up. He actually acts way less entitled now. It ended up having a lasting positive effect on him, even though he wouldn't admit it. While working in a casino here in Las Vegas, a herd of girls came up to my window, and one proceeded to tell me about her great birthday party itinerary that her dad had paid for her 18th birthday, with no adult in the party, just a bunch of teenage girls out in Vegas, where none of them could do anything because none of them were 21. I couldn't even check them into their reservation. They started yelling and screaming at me, and I calmly called security. And security told them that they could either go play in the arcade or leave and try to find a hotel off the strip that will take them in without being 21. Their anger turned to tears and the security guard was unmoved. Was at a Starbucks, and this lady apparently thought that people gave her parents free drinks and such for her after all this time. Like the cashier told her the total and she said, "Wait, I don't get it for free?" She never realized her parents swiping their cards all those years was paying for her things, I guess. A favorite family story is when my uncle called him from the police station on a Friday night. He was in high school at the time and got caught drinking. My grandfather answered the phone and simply asked, "What did you do?" And my uncle responds, "Nothing. Great, tell them to let you go," and hangs up the phone and goes back to sleep. Both my uncle and the police were stunned, but it being the weekend, my uncle ended up having to get transferred to the county jail until Monday morning. The police from the jail called my grandfather on Monday morning and said, "You've got to pick the poor kid up." His time in jail wasn't particularly traumatic, but it taught him a pretty valuable lesson in how principled his grandfather was. Had he been honest and just admitted what he did, he wouldn't have been in that situation. That's our second story showing us that although people who are born into money are as often as not massive entitled idiots, those who actually go from rags to riches aren't necessarily so. It's too bad there's so little room to do so these days. No joke here, back in high school in the 90s, this kid got a brand new Chevy Camaro. I had an old 80s Pontiac Phoenix that had the straight six. It was by far not a racing car, but this tool was just looking to brag at what he got compared to the busted cars we got. About 2 days later, while we were waiting at the stoplight, this idiot tries to race us. I'm in my car and I pull up with my friends. He starts revving it real loud and tries to do a burnout. Mind you, the light was red and the roads were not wet. So he managed to get a tiny burnout going, some smoke and whatnot, when his tires catch traction and he goes barreling into the intersection and smashed the car of the wife of one of the very few cops in my tiny town. Needless to say, that didn't work out for him very well. A kid from my high school came from a well-known family that was very involved in politics. He slacked off in school and was mostly a condescending butthead for years. After graduation, he didn't really do anything, but eventually decided to run for office as he had the same name as his father. He won easily because people didn't realize it was the kid. As a state rep, he posted on Facebook about, enjoying his women battered rather than plain, and asking to join the Black Caucus because he liked hip-hop. He also dropped a loaded piece on the floor in the middle of a session after fighting for the right to carry a weapon in the state house as a responsible owner. He kept getting elected despite these issues because his family was well connected and he had a dedicated following from some political groups. After 6 years in office, he got busted for some pretty illicit and illegal dealings over the internet. When they arrested him for it, they also discovered he'd been dealing substances. The worst part is that his family is actually super nice and genuinely made the community a better place, but now they have to deal with all the issues from him. He was an apple that fell very far from the tree. Middle school. A classmate was on the phone when most of us didn't even have cell phones, screaming at her stepdad, "Patrick, I need the $500. I need to buy new jeans." She did not get the $500, but she did later get to be a teen mom, so that was cool. When I was a teenager, my sister and I saw through our windows that there were two guys getting into her car. We ran downstairs as fast as possible and caught them in the act. One managed to run away, but the other one froze and didn't run. He couldn't have been much older than me. My sister called the cops and the guy kept looking at us and trying to figure out a way to escape. My sister said, "Run if you want, my brother will catch you." The cops came and so did his parents. His mum drove a frickin' amazing car and the lady looked furious and sad. She was dressed real nice and she looked like she was pretty successful. As soon as she got out, she began yelling, "Why? We give you everything. You have everything. Why would you try and steal? Don't we give you enough?" The kid just seemed to shrink and get smaller. I don't get it, frickin' butthole. I hope he turned his life around and began to be around better people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Freshman year of college, the guy across the hall from me was a spoiled rich kid from a big southern city. Old money clearly coming out of his butt. A couple of weeks into the second semester, he and a buddy found a checkbook on the sidewalk. Stupid idiots decided to write themselves a check and cash it in the bank that the account was in. The teller immediately called the cops and they both got arrested. We talked the night he got arrested and he laughed and said his dad would take care of it and everything would be fine. That weekend, we met his dad as they moved everything out of the dorms since his dumb butt got expelled. I guess Daddy didn't take care of it. Nothing too serious, but I taught at an international school in Africa and we'd take the high school students camping one week out of the year. Most of these kids were not used to camping at all and have never taken public transport in their lives. They had full-time drivers bring them to school and pick them up. Some of them are from very wealthy and politically connected families. Having them set up tents and get dirty, not be able to shower every day and sleep on hard ground was pretty new to them. Some of them actually love it, but others are sad, pathetic wretches the entire week. Ah, camping, the great equalizer. I went to a very rich, predominantly white Catholic high school. One moment I do remember was the wind absolutely being taken out of a girl's sails when I explained to her why our school dominated the area's skiing, golf, and equestrian competitions, but never anything else. For a lot of kids in that school, the moment they learned they were rich was the moment they learned that most girls don't have their own horses growing up. A kid I knew won a cool $1 million off a scratch ticket when he was 19. He acted like a big shot, arrogantly buying rounds of drinks for entire bars, didn't do crap for 20 years. Then he got the last check. Alcoholic, no savings, no assets, and no skills. He's now in and out of hospitals for alcohol poisoning and mental breakdowns. He lost his paper hat job, his girlfriend, everything. There you go. Maybe it isn't explicitly being born into money that makes you a sack of crap. Maybe it's just getting more money than you know what to do with when you're young and dumb. If I had $1 million when I was 19, I actually think my life might have gone pretty similarly, and I'd be worse off now. For a couple of years in high school, I went to the super expensive American private school in Switzerland. The company my dad worked for paid for almost all of the tuition, so it was an amazing opportunity for me. Most of the kids in this school were either State Department or from American families living in Saudi. Saudi provided expat kids with school up until 10th grade, so you had to go to school abroad to finish high school. There were, however, a few Saudi kids that were there, mostly so that they'd be able to speak flawless English to help out with their future careers. One of these kids, who I'll call the Prince, was somewhere in the line of Saudi succession, but honestly he was like 1,455th in line for the throne. Not a real contender for king, but his family was rich.
like rich in a way that most of us can't even imagine. The school had some rules, like you couldn't have a car as a student, even if you were old enough to get a license in Switzerland. This rule was a real buzzkill for the prince, but he made it through the year somehow. Over the summer after his junior year, he drove back to the school from Geneva in his Lamborghini, probably just because he could do it outside the school year. On his way up the mountain, the road is like an endless series of hairpin turns, he managed to flip his Lambo into a vineyard while trying to navigate one of those hairpin turns. I'm guessing a Lambo has a lot of power and he took it too hard. His parents, furious at what he had done, decided to punish him by replacing his Lamborghini with a Porsche. The prince was so angry. He complained about it bitterly when the school year started up again. The rest of us kind of just looked at each other in amazement. Same planet, different worlds, I guess. Local rich kid had his SUV in a no parking area at the club. Tow truck shows up to tow it away and the kid goes ballistic. "Do you know who my father is?" etc. to the tow truck driver. After a minute or two of this, the passenger gets out of the tow truck and is a full patch Hell's Angel. The biker politely tells him it doesn't matter who he thinks his family is, and the SUV is towed away. I knew a kid in high school whose parents were loaded. When he got his driver's license, they bought him a $70,000 Mercedes. Within a month or two, he had totaled the car while driving drunk. Parents pulled strings to get him off the full weight of the DUI. Oh, and they bought him another $70K Mercedes. He took too many substances and too much booze when he was 23. He's no longer alive now. I knew one who apparently couldn't fathom how people live on a budget. We used to hang out a lot at her insistence, but she liked to eat at expensive places, whereas I'd have no issue with my meals coming from somewhere cheaper. However, she kept pouting and insisting that I stay. I said I couldn't unless she wanted to spot me. She didn't. I then walked her through the math and showed her the cost of my meals with her. Every day totaled my entire wage for the month. She didn't stop pouting, but from then on, I could eat by myself in peace. You know, I'm trying to be a better man and not take delight in anyone's misfortune, but a rich kid in my high school totaled his pickup truck. He got angry when parents wouldn't replace it, so he purposefully crashed his twin brother's pickup truck, because if he couldn't have one, neither could the brother. Not to mention all the legal stuff that I'm sure was fallout from doing that. Anyway, that kid disappeared. I assumed he went to jail or something like that. Found out recently that no, he didn't actually. His parents literally disowned him, like with the paperwork and everything, and sent him on his way to fend for himself. And I have no idea how that turned out. A guy from my robotics group had his entire life handed to him. His dad was stupid rich because his dad bought shares in an oil field that turned out to have 40 times the expected yield, making his $100,000 investment become around $3 million, and then he dumped that into real estate rentals. He decided it would be fun to do a school trip in Philly acting rich as all heck. He drove his lifted, modded SUV to a school we were doing a robotics event at in North Philly, talking to younger kids about how it's fun and their school has started offering it, and then we were going to the Franklin Institute from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., then a Phantoms hockey game. Well, 9:30 rolls around and we leave the school to see our bus driver talking to the cops. 5 kids drove themselves down, and guess which car was stolen? His $90K monstrosity was missing, and after 2 months, and all that was ever recovered was his stereo from a pawn shop and his laptop. The best frickin' part? He didn't have insurance on it yet because he can just buy the other person's car if there's an accident. Anyway, I'd win the legal fight. His dad flipped out over it and cut his allowance down to $200 a month and forced him to drive a beater until he saved up his own money. That brat's punishment is more than I could have ever wanted as an upper middle class kid. Growing up around a well-to-do old area, the thing is you wouldn't know it. Like most of our neighbors were comfortably off because we didn't drive fancy 40K cars or whatever. Yeah, the narrator had an allowance as a young adult, and not a bad one either. It was still, and I can't stress this enough, a very small fraction of what this guy was getting when his parents were done with his crap. A rich, scummy injury lawyer's kid was in my class in high school. Goes to college, a mid-sized school in the Midwest, and gets plastered drunk. Parents bought him and his friends alcohol since freshman year, so nothing new there, and the RA said he has to write him up for alcohol in the dorms. The guy then punches 2 RAs and then gets the cops called on him and knocks a cop's tooth out as well. Long story short, his parents have to drive back 6 to 7 hours after 1 day to get him, and he's not even allowed to leave the state until his hearing. The last I heard, he's working at a fast food restaurant. In a country with a high alcohol taxation, rich kids enter the pub, like 10 to 12 of them, they throw the card at the bartender demanding shots. What would you like? Whatever, Dad's paying. The bartender pours double Johnny Walker Blues for all the brats and some randoms that they've treated. The brat with the card had tears in his eyes when the tab came in. My dad's gonna kill me. I did enjoy that free whiskey though. Here's a switch. Highly successful local doctor and politician expects his son to attend medical school and become a doctor. The son opts out, gets a job with a new company called Costco pumping gas. He's been with that company ever since, just his regular pay raises and bonus checks give him a good life. He just didn't want the high-stress life that his dad had. If I was sure I'd inherit most of my dad's wealth, I'd do that too. Work at Costco just to socialize and pass the time, and the earnings for personal spending and whatnot. Just spend wisely and not be a jerk, and then I would have lived comfortably after that. This isn't the best, as it's pretty sad and frankly undeserved, but a good example of the question asked. I went to a very expensive private elementary school. A friend of mine grew up wealthy, her father was a surgeon and mother a stay-at-home wife. They were very controlling of her and, quite honestly, a bit scary. They sheltered her to the extreme and she frequently repeated insane things that they'd said verbatim because that was all she knew. If she was told to clean her room but left an item out upon her parents' inspection, they'd throw the item out no matter what it was. Once it was something very sentimental to her. I can't remember exactly what, and when she told me and I expressed sympathy, she said something like, "Oh no, it's okay, it's my fault. If I told my children to clean their rooms but they didn't and had their friends come over, their friends would go home and tell their parents about how much of a slob my family is, and that can't happen." This was her concern as a 10-year-old. When it came time for college, they sent her to an expensive, hard-to-get-into school and told her that her sole purpose there was to find a husband, specifically a doctor or an engineer, to keep her as a stay-at-home wife. She flat out told me this was her only purpose, which broke my heart because she's a smart person who was able to get into said school to begin with, and her parents should have been encouraging different goals for her. Well, she found a boyfriend, but at the end of her 4 years of undergrad, he turned out to be a cheating, narcissistic D-bag. The narcissistic D-bag part was obvious to me from the get-go, but she had no idea what a healthy relationship looked like. However, the cheating was obvious enough to be a deal-breaker. So instead of going straight to marriage, which disappointed her parents and they kicked her out of the house, she suddenly had to become solely independent, found a job and an apartment, and is doing well for herself. She's a totally different person now and has really come a long way.
Friends and family of Karens, what's it like? I divorced Karen. I haven't had to see a manager since. Thank you. But it is my favorite when family members or boyfriends swing by later to tell me they're sorry for Karen's behavior and that I'm actually doing a great job. Why are we even asking this question? None of them are actually here. They're on shared Facebook accounts named Karen and Dave Smith. My mum is a literal Karen, as in it's in her name, but she's like a bizarro Karen. She'll constantly ask to speak with managers and supervisors and bosses, but when said managers arrive, she unloads about the employees helping her out being fantastic, hardworking, and friendly. And then she'll spend 20 minutes trying to figure out if she and the manager know someone in common. 9 times out of 10, they do. As a kid, it would embarrass me, and as an adult, it's one of my favorite things about her. She makes people feel good about the work they do, and it's really special to watch how wonderful she makes people feel. Plus, she's got long, gorgeous silver hair. My sister is also a Karen. She spent her life working with the disabled and is currently an essential worker. It is the absolute best. I love my wife. I didn't write that. My sister is a Karen. Everyone feels so sorry for her husband. Everything is his fault. He's treated like a slave. She only addresses him by yelling. She constantly insults him. We have no idea why he hasn't divorced her or flipped out and attacked her. We've all told her to cool it, and her response is that he's just so dumb. I could go on, but my sister is really a horrible person. You know, I don't think there'll be any actual Karen husbands writing in here. They're probably all on Facebook. And I don't think they have profiles, at least ones under their own names. I think they're only on Facebook in their partner's pictures. Also, as the narrator has done in the past, he'd like to clarify that this story grouping is open for both female Karens and their male counterparts, the Kens. I married someone with a Karen for a sister. Sister-in-law is the frickin' worst. I hate more than anything going out to dinner with her, listening to her order food and talk to servers. Holidays are also terrible. She sends out long lists of expected gifts. She celebrates every holiday and birthday specifically for presents, even when it's not appropriate. The funny thing is, one time I was away from the dinner table when the bill came, and my sister-in-law waited for me to return to pay the bill by actually handing it to me. She didn't give it to her sibling or my partner, or pay her half, but expressly handed it to me to pay. By the way, her husband is an idiot and they're a match made in heaven. And I'm sorry to disappoint everyone, but yes, I did pay. There are many reasons as to why, but the biggest one is that it got me out of the restaurant faster. Also, it helps me control the tip. Another time we went to a family brunch where the bill was split. Karen's sister-in-law waited to see what other people tipped so she could lower the overall tip percentage for the waitress to what sister-in-law thought was deserving. We didn't know this until afterwards, when she bragged about it later, so no one even knew to stop her. And she's invited to these family meals because she has 2 children that we actually want a relationship with. So she has that emotional blackmail card. I'm not married to one, but my mom was a major Karen back when I was growing up. "Mom, can we just go?" was my favorite expression, then the apologetic nod as we left the store. I really relate to this. All throughout my childhood it happened. I remember being an embarrassed 11-year-old walking around apologizing for my mom's behavior in stores and restaurants, and it sucked. It's supposed to be the other way around. "Damn it, Mom, stop being a little bag of crap, it's my turn." Precisely. Frick you, Mum. Stop making racially channeled attacks on the minimum wage waiter. I want to unscrew the lid on all the salts and take a massive crap in my pants because I'm not allowed ice cream for a main course. Instead, I have to go, "I'm really sorry about Mom. She's been unwell and doesn't mean it. I'm so sorry." I mean, it's funny now, but actually kinda sad in my memory. That stuff leaves marks under the surface. I had to be a full-time carer and adult at 11. I sometimes feel like I didn't get to be a kid for long enough. I know a couple with a Karen. She blamed him for everything. The husband was, in our opinion, something of a saint. Once she broke a glass in the kitchen, came back and sat down at the table and said, "That was your fault." We all just stared at her. She looked sheepish and said, "I knew that one probably wouldn't work." They're divorced now. I guess even saintliness has its limits. My husband's ex is a Karen. She's a classic narcissist. When one of our feral hens started acting aggressive towards other hens, my stepson named her Karen. Honestly, she's perfect. She makes me so happy. Help me! My mum is a Karen, literally overreacts to everything. Whenever something doesn't go her way, you guessed it, gotta speak to the manager or whoever's in charge. Sometimes it's really embarrassing to go out in public with her because she'll just yell at the service workers for the smallest of things. Also, she does have a bob cut. My mom was a Karen for a while. She literally didn't realize it until my brother and I started calling her out on it when we were early teens because we were embarrassed. She made genuine efforts to change, and a few years later, she's the sweetest woman you've ever met. I'm just saying there's hope. My aunt is a Karen, and my uncle is this soft-spoken giant. He never stands up to her in any way, except once. It was at their daughter's wedding. She was about to interrupt the ceremony to close a window because she was chilly. Everyone sitting close could hear her whisper, "I'm gonna do it, but I don't want to be a jerk." My uncle, in a calm, quiet tone, says quickly, "Why stop now?" Almost as if his filter just missed this one. I swear I could hear my dad snort 2 rows back trying to hold in his laughter. Karen was not happy. I taught my nephews, ages 9 and 11, about Karens last year when they stayed with us for a week after school let out. After describing traits and observing them in the wild, they asked somewhere around day 2, Is our mom a Karen? My reply were, "Your words, not mine." It's a weird clash between the need to be respectful and not undermine someone as a parent, and to call out bad behavior when you see it. I don't know if this was a good thing to do, but at least the kid might resolve to not grow up to exhibit some of these behaviors. My mum can be difficult sometimes, but isn't a Karen. When my sister and I were in our mid-20s, my mum had to start caring for our grandma. After a particularly stressful Saturday afternoon at my grandma's home, we were all carpooling back to my mum's place, and she said to my sister and I, "If I ever start acting like grandma, you'd better tell me." My sister and I sat there in complete silence. After a couple of beats, she yelled, "I do not act like my mother!" It made my sister and I laugh until we cried, mostly because, yes, she did and does act like her mother. My mum's a Karen. She's self-aware that she is a Karen. My siblings and I send her memes about it. When my stepdad divorced her last summer, we were all amazed he lasted 17 years, to be honest. None of us like going out with her. It's terrible. And my husband just straight up tells her, "No, you aren't talking to the manager when we go in a place." I'll tell you guys a story my stepfather told us. They're farmers and they own a small beef and bee farm. They have a store they go to for bee supplies. The owner called my stepdad and asked him to please be the one to pick up their stuff because his staff was tired of dealing with my mum. He's the only one who went to the store for the next 5 years. My close friend's parents are jerks, but she's really sweet. She learned bad behavior from parents, so she'd be super rude when we went out if she didn't get her way, but never to her friends. I told her about it and she was sort of receptive but didn't really get it. So I started pointing it out at restaurants. "Mary, that was super rude, what the frick, dude?" "Dude, Mary, chill!" Stuff like that. Probably really annoying, but I made my point. She very quickly realized she was being a jerk and she changed. If someone is a good person but they're being a jerk, it helps to have a chat first. Maybe they just don't realize it. My mum is a Karen. She thinks the world is supposed to cater to her, serve her, and everyone else is wrong. Once we went to Carl's Jr. and she ordered 4 burgers for the 4 of us. She pulls one out of the bag while the guy is getting our drinks and she hides the burger. She complains that he forgot a burger. She pulls them out one by one and counts it out in front of him. It's obviously missing because she hid it, and he's swearing up and down that he put them all in the bag. I'm stunned, speechless, and it happened so fast. She got a free burger and laughed as we drove off. I was just staring at her and she opened it up and ate it on the drive home. She ate her actual burger like the 5th one never existed. I can't even explain how she is when she's in the hospital. She treats it like it should be a luxury stay in a hotel. Married to one. She doesn't get why people think Karens complain so much. It's annoying for her and she'd like to talk to someone about this. 4 years of a toxic relationship, luckily unmarried. I broke up with her on Monday, again. We're kind of screwed financially because of this lockdown, so we're just feeling things out for a month before we decide for sure. This is a cycle on repeat. I constantly have to cut her off and speak over her because of the way she treats people. Waiters, sale assistants, gym staff, neighbors, landlords, randoms we meet in bars. We were both waiters at the beginning of our relationship, so she's worked in the industry, but she still lacks empathy. She blames the waiter if something is out of stock. My second major issue is that we're now both English second language teachers. She teaches kindergarten while I teach high school. Now that we're both working from home, I hear how she speaks to her students, and it's really opened up another aspect of her personality that I just don't like. She'll berate a student for not understanding instead of evaluating her ability to explain. Shouting at 3-year-olds in their second language just doesn't fly with me. A lot of her behavior stems from a self-defense mechanism due to insecurity, but that's not an excuse. She doesn't realize how mean she is to people, including myself. I'm a people pleaser that would rather sacrifice my own comfort than someone else's, and she expects me to be a jerk to people because I'm a big guy with tattoos. I don't exactly look soft. It's toxic as heck. Please help. Oh, and the hardest part about this breakup? Our bedroom life is so good it rivals most adult films, easily. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My mum is absolutely one. I spend most of my time with her in public apologizing to people after she's walked away. The one and only time it comes in handy is when I've bought cars and had her come in during the price negotiation phase. She's knocked off thousands purely due to how unpleasant she is and how much people want her to just get the heck out the door. Please help me, everyone. I'm sorry, you'll need to speak to the manager. I'd say the 2 biggest categories we have in the answers that we've received here are, first, people venting about their mothers whilst also trying not to be too mean, and then these hilarious joke hostage messages. At least I hope they're jokes. Otherwise, my god, you poor souls. Dated a male Karen for 8 years. He was a semi-successful business owner who was twice my age, and I was young and dumb, for lack of a better word. The gist of our relationship was him trying to take over every part of my life. For instance, he'd order for me at restaurants and would dissuade me if I wanted to try something new. If I had a problem with something, it would be brushed off, but if he had a problem, then, you guessed it, he had to talk to a manager. Not knowing any better, I just thought he was very particular, and even started copying some of his tendencies, like speaking up when I felt like I wasn't getting the right service when I was out on my own. I realized who he was when we were flying back from Vegas and our luggage was heavier than when we flew in. Obviously, we'd bought extra things which made up for the weight difference, so as he demanded to know an explanation from the check-in clerk as to why, if it was the same luggage, it would weigh more, I innocently answered that it must have been the extra shoes and clothes. He was quiet and paid up. Later, he told me not to do that again, as he knew the reason why the luggage was heavier. He was just trying to get away with not paying. At that moment, a light bulb went off in my head. This man, who'd spent $1,500 on an exotic dancer for his friends, was making an already stressful job more stressful for the clerk in order to avoid paying $60. We broke up soon after, and I checked myself on the Karen tendencies that he had rubbed off on me. My ex-wife is a Karen in every sense but name. It was always so embarrassing. She was incapable of treating anyone like a human for the most trivial of occurrences. It was hell for me as a person that's pretty forgiving and doesn't seek out confrontation. So in one word, it was hell. Also, she's very codependent and jumps from relationship to relationship these days. I'm not surprised. My life has been a living heck. The number of times I've had to intervene to save the life of a customer service rep over nickels is insane. I've asked for a divorce now, just a couple of weeks ago. Guess how that went over? Stay strong, lawyer up, bury gold in a place where only you know where it is. Prepare for war. But good on you. Bury your gold in 4 different locations around Pawnee. My mum is a Karen. Not fun. I think she was part of the reason the girl I loved left, because whenever she was around, my mum behaved much better and put on a nice face. We argued frequently about my relationship with my mum. Hurts a lot. Don't think that I can fully let this one go. Look, I love my mum very much, and she's generally a very nice person. I've spent a good while trying to put it to words accurately, but it's difficult. Everything is very minor and very subtle, but it's constant all the time. It's not what she does, it's how she does it sort of thing. She doesn't try to hide her behavior when in public, she just tries to put her best face forward when around others like everyone else does. I don't know if she's aware of what she does when at home because it's so minor and subtle, but I have a difficult time believing that since it's constant and other reasons. For those concerned for me in some way, thank you, it means a lot. Only one of my friends knows the specifics of my relationship with my mum, so it's nice to receive support. To relieve some of your worries, she doesn't control my life or my actions. The pain she causes is dwarfed greatly by everything she has done for me. Without her, I wouldn't have made it to where I am today, and I'm extremely thankful and lucky to have her in my life despite the pain. I don't think I'll cut her out of my life. Less frequent contact helps, but she's not so great a terror that no contact is ever needed. I look forward to seeing her spoil my grandchildren, and I know she'll trust me to raise them and not try to take over and do it herself. I divorced an awful Karen who was convicted of domestic violence. That's a misdemeanor, folks. She got half of everything. Totally worth it. My life before was a nightmare, and escape was priceless. I got engaged to one. She was raised as a princess by her military father. However, she's super down to earth, but God forbid you work in the service industry and mess something up. She's worked at IHOP during college, so it humbled her compared to the rest of her family. She just writes reviews now, good or bad, and emails corporate to complain. If something is wrong with my food, she refuses me to sit there and eat it. Which I hate, but I have gotten her better about it, I believe. So maybe she's just a recovering Karen at this point? My mother is a Karen. If something minor inconveniences her, she blows it up into a huge deal, constantly complains, belittles me, and has a slight superiority complex. Oh my god, I read the title as Koreans, and I was thoroughly confused and amused by these stories. I'll see myself out. I'm not married to a Karen, but someone in my family decided to get hitched to one, and let me say, it's frickin' hell. I don't go to any social event if Karen will be there. It keeps the peace in my family, to be honest. Nor do I go alone with Karen. She's a nightmare to everyone in her path, from car guards to cashiers, even her friends. No one can be better than her or smarter than her, and she's just frickin' exhausting. The worst part is, her kids are becoming just like her. People who are married to Karens are the guy equivalent of Karens, or they're aloof goofs unaware that their Karen is a Karen. You won't get a real answer from them. Well, there's an awful lot of fiction going on here then, although I guess the majority of the stories are from family rather than spouses, so maybe your Ken theory holds some water. Was married to a male Karen, everything, and I mean everything, could set him off. We were at a local tap room and his iPhone automatically connected to the Wi-Fi. Keep in mind he had full bars on our cell service. The Wi-Fi was being wonky and wasn't working. The manager, super nice guy, comes over and asks how we're doing while he washes some glasses in the dish pit on the other side of the bar. The following conversation ensues. Keep in mind my husband is super irritated at this made-up problem because our cell service is working just fine and he could just turn off the Wi-Fi. Your Wi-Fi is frickin' trash. Yeah, sorry, we recently upgraded our internet and they're sending us a new modem. It's supposed to be here this week. If you say you have Wi-Fi, you should make sure it actually works. I know, I'm sorry. I'd be happy to restart the modem to see if that helps. My husband then ignores him and continues to talk under his breath about a made-up issue. This was my life for almost 5 years. The sense of entitlement was frustrating enough in public, but more so at home. I'd apologized to more servers, retail workers, neighbors, and random people in public for him in 5 years than the rest of my life outside of him. You know what? Now that I'm talking about it, maybe he's not so much a male Karen, he's more like a, piece of crap. Not married to one, but my mum is a Karen whose name actually is Karen. Simply put, I haven't seen her in over a year because I couldn't take it anymore. Living with her was just an exhausting nightmare. Karen's world revolves around Karen. Nobody else's issues matter. If you tell her that you had a bad day, she'll give you 20 reasons why her day was worse. You worked 60 hours this week? Well, when she was your age, she'd work 80. You were in the hospital after having major surgery? She has a pinched nerve in her arm, which is somehow worse. Oh, your boyfriend cheated on you? She couldn't even begin to tell you about all the heartbreak she's experienced in her life. She complains left and right about everything and anything. If you're taking a week break after just getting back from college, she'll ask why you haven't gotten a job yet and claim that you're lazy. If you go out to eat at a restaurant, the food is always too cold or too hot or too salty. You can only ever go to the places she wants to go because everything else is garbage. My entire graduation dinner, she complained about how cold the food was. She thrives in getting attention and constantly seeks it, but she has very few actual friends. Facebook is her lifeblood and she's always looking to start something on there. She's the queen of sharing uninformed, misguided, conservative propaganda, which always starts fights in her comments. Also, if a tragedy happens in the family, like the passing of my teenage cousin, she'll make a big scene on Facebook and expect condolences from anyone and everyone, and makes notes of the people who don't give her what she wants. And don't get me started with the blatant racism. I've heard everything from, watch out for the black people on the subway, they'll try to take your purse, to, it should be illegal for those Muslims to cover their faces. You should be able to see someone's face. One of my best friends is black and she once told me, he's one of the good ones, they should all be like him. And minor, but the house always has to be spotless. You have a shirt on your bedroom floor? Pick it up. You kids are all slobs. We have people coming over. No, we don't, and even if we do, why would they be in my bedroom? Her house is her house, and she'll let you know. Any object she spent money on doesn't belong to you, it belongs to her. She also spends way too much money on home decor like oriental rugs, furniture, and then complains about how she has no money. In short, my mother is a Karen who's actually named Karen. Living with her is a nightmare. What's the most bizarre thing you've ever witnessed on a security cam? I worked in a well-known discount retailer a few years ago, and I was friendly with the store detectives. One day, they called me into their camera room to show me some footage they got over the weekend. Several overhead views of a middle-aged man lingering behind various younger women, looking all around, waiting for his window, and then bending down quickly to sniff their rear ends. He was slick. None of them seemed to notice this guy crouched right behind them with his face just a couple of inches from their butts. They got him on camera doing this like 4 or 5 times before they tracked him down and told him to leave the store. Oh boy, I've been on the opposite end of this. I worked IT at a fairly big company. I used a scooter to move around the tile floor building while fixing things from room to room. Well, one day, most of the employees were in a big meeting room meeting about something. I just so happened to need to go into that room to restart a switch. Now, I was really good at drifting around corners on said scooter, and had made a habit of doing this around the corners. Yeah, I know, I had this coming. Well, unbeknownst to me, not only were they having a meeting in said room, there was also water spilled right in front of the room. So, right as I drifted around the corner, I hit the water and of course lost control and absolutely slammed into a metal industrial fan they had at the entrance. It was frickin' loud, and of course I caused the whole meeting to stop mid whatever they were talking about. The head presenter saw the whole thing and was doubled over, just laughing his guts out. Most everyone else was just confused. 2 weeks later, I got asked to come help set up something which broke during our meeting, quote, and I showed up to the same room with the same people. As soon as I walked in, the CEO and owner pops open the video footage on the projector for everyone to see. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty damn funny. I unfortunately don't have a copy of the video anywhere that I know of. I think I was given a copy on a flash drive, but this was so many years ago and I've lost track of it since. I honestly have been kicking myself over losing that for a while. I'll try and find it in my boxes of crap if I get the time. Also, it wasn't a highly important meeting. Apparently it was just a bi-weekly meeting the company had to have, and it wasn't a huge company or anything, maybe 100 total employees. Everyone thought it was hilarious, so yeah, that was fortunate. The only downside was the janitor finally figuring out what all the streak marks on the tiles were coming from. It's good to have employees like this to raise morale from time to time with their antics. Also, I wonder what speed that scooter was going for you to be able to drift on it, because to be honest, that doesn't seem safe. Around 2003, I was working at Sam's Club in loss prevention. One day, while watching the tapes, I saw an old man uncomfortably approach the tire mounting area. He proceeded to drop his pants and sit on a stack of tires about 3 high. Got up and walked away a few minutes later. Upon inspection, we discovered that he went number 2 on the stack of tires. Of course, we knew before we saw it because it stank so very badly. A woman I know went to a casino about 2 hours after they opened on a weekday to get tickets for a show. As she was walking by the security desk, 2 women behind it were laughing hysterically. She knew one of the women and asked what was so funny. Turns out a couple of minutes earlier they'd found a pair of women's underwear. That's not too strange in itself, but that early on a weekday in the middle of a main walkway, plus the fact that they're big old granny panties, got them curious, so they were replaying the security tape. Sure enough, a little old lady in a dress with a walker was just walking along when her undies just started to drop off. Every step they fell a little more till they hit the floor. She stepped out of them and kept going. I used to work in the control room at a county jail about 10 years ago. It was our job to control all the automated doors and the security cameras in the facility. This included following officers with the cameras during wellness checks every 15 minutes through our special housing, which involved checking each individual's cell's camera. One day, we were following the officer on the first check after lunch was handed out. We started checking every cell's camera. There were a lot of undressed guys eating sandwiches, but that's nothing unusual to be honest. And then we got to the 6th or 7th cell. The first thing I saw when the feed came up was blood. There was blood everywhere. The bed, the sink, the toilet, the walls. It's on everything. But the guy was amazingly still on his feet and screaming at the officer when we enabled the intercom. He's screaming, "I don't need it! I'll never need it again, so just take it!" And he throws something at the door. His member. He threw his severed manhood at the door. He broke his lunch tray and used one of the pieces to cut his downstairs thing off. Because, as he saw it, he wasn't going to need it again because he was going to be sentenced to prison. I don't even remember what his charges were, but I remember that he was only looking at about 2 years maximum. I worked in a full-contact haunted house this past Halloween. It was fun hearing the security guards talking about the stuff they saw on monitors. Then the owner said that once he was walking by the monitors when he saw an actor pick a guy up over his head and throw him over his shoulder into the coffin, which was padded and really comfy. The owner was kind of mortified. The security guard nonchalantly said, "Yeah, he's been doing that all night." I used to work security night shift in a 34-floor hotel. While doing my rounds, I walked by the gym to see a huge hole in the wall. We're talking 1 meter by 1.5 meters, with one of our potted ferns which had been dragged in front to pathetically try to cover it. After reviewing video footage, I found this 300-plus pound man running on the treadmill. The man had probably never used one in his life and seemed to be struggling with the controls. He was running faster and faster and eventually couldn't keep up. He went flying off, rammed into the wall, and stayed down for at least 5 minutes. He eventually got up, covered up the hole with the fern, and walked out sadly. I haven't watched Family Guy in forever, and I can still vividly picture Peter Griffin doing this down to the mannerisms. This is actually kind of sad. That poor man, he must have been humiliated. And yeah, property damage and all. He'd probably been fat-shamed and this just broke his spirit that little bit more with embarrassment. Imagine laying on that floor, probably hurt and hurting inside. This made me so sad. One place I worked at was a hidden bunker in the middle of nowhere. We were only network security, but we moved there after September 11th because someone in management thought that it would just make a good bit of PR about how secure we kept everything. The car park looked like it was just a random paved area in the middle of fields. hidden down a tiny country lane as the entrances couldn't be seen that easily. We had cameras watching the outside, and one weekend a bunch of expensive cars pulled up, people got out and started filming an adult movie and then just drove off. But the weirdest thing was that we noticed the cows in the field next door always had at least one cow watching the entrance. They took turns. One cow would always start watching the door before another would look away to start eating. We got a little obsessive about trying to find any footage where there wasn't a cow staring at the door, and we could never find any. Saw a trucker drive his huge trailer to the loading station and fit it in like a glove. Perfect, first try. Then falling out of the cabin dead drunk. Damn Russians. This isn't something bizarre in particular, but you should just know that if you fall on camera, everyone that works in the building that a security guard likes will see that video multiple times. If there's security footage in the stairwell in my residential building, I'm willing to bet that they have a tape dedicated to the goofy crap the narrator has done in the stairwell. Dropped fragile groceries, sneaking past the old neighbor that always wants to burst out and talk, putting his glasses on over his contact lenses and falling down the stairs. If those cameras exist, I want the footage played at my funeral. One of my customers, who was drunk, cycling home completely undressed. My boss and I proceeded to follow them, just wetting ourselves laughing, and the funniest bit was when an ambulance started following too. Once my customer had arrived home, the paramedics proceeded to have a chat with him. He was still completely undressed, of course. I work at a car plant, I won't say which company, but every night, this homeless guy hops the fence and sleeps in a car, and he's out by 4 a.m. on the dot. Myself and the other security guards decided not to report it since there's never any damage or things missing from the car. Security officer at a bank, we had cameras on the inside and on the outside, with the idea being that the outdoor cameras could capture a license plate during a heist. Thankfully, that never happened while I was working there. One day, something in the upper right corner of an outdoor camera feed caught my eye. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it looked like a small animal moving back and forth. I sent one of the other officers to investigate, and he came back shaking his head with a big grin on his face. It was a homeless person stroking his eggplant in broad daylight. I used to work night security summers at this recreational campground. Had tent sites and RV hookups, but also cabins, ranging from simple to top of the line with their own hot tubs. There were multiple pools, tennis courts, miniature golf, the works. It was camping for people that didn't want to go camping, basically. One night, a group of young women in their 20s or so, it turned out later it was a bachelorette party, approached the back gate cameras almost in military-style formation. They turned and all 6 flashed their chests at the cameras. The incident became known as the 12-gun salute. I watched a pickup park outside a garage-style storage unit. The driver walked away. Hours later at dusk, another guy crawled out from under a tarp on the bed of the truck, rolled up the storage unit door, rolls an ultralight out of the unit and flies off. Another one, less bizarre and more horrifying, recovered footage of a parking structure collapsing into an occupied shopping center food court to assist with recovering hopefully living victims. I did this program that let you experience life as a police officer while in high school. I had a uniform and everything. I was allowed to work in the jail, but my stepdad worked there too and wouldn't let me work days or in certain parts for fear of harassment. One time I worked an overnight weekend shift in the jail communication and security room. Someone came in with a guitar or banjo, turned on the comm for a couple of isolated rooms, and played a whole bluegrass-type song for the inmates. They were dancing and knee-slapping on camera. It was a great time. Also crazy that you had to unlock each door remotely each time, and the officers couldn't access them on their own. It was a great learning experience, to be honest. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I wasn't watching a camera so much, but was working the front desk. The call button to the main elevators was hard to find because of a poorly placed potted plant. This one lady couldn't find the call button, and before I could walk over to show her where it was, she resorted to knocking on the elevator door. It took all I had to hold my laughter until the elevator closed with her inside. I had access to cameras at my old job and I'd watch them whenever something interesting happened. One time we had a drunk guy come and squat and then smear his brown matter all over our walls and then simply walk away. Oh boy, have I got some doozies. Got a few years under my belt doing this, so let's go. I watched a guy knock an automatic sliding door completely off the track because he was too busy looking at his phone. We had to call in a techie to fix it. I've watched a poor old lady stop in front of the escalator briefly, and when she moved, there was a brown spot on the floor. She had started to go number 2 and tracked it up the escalator and halfway across the store to the bathroom. When she got done and came out of the bathroom, she continued shopping like nothing had happened. Our store was a biohazard for the rest of the day. I watched one chick pull out a pair of bolt cutters out of her purse to cut the security wire on some handbags. She cut 2 wires and ran off with 4 bags. She got caught later that afternoon. I watched another guy try to steal a spinner of sunglasses only to misjudge which automatic door opened and slammed into it, sending glasses flying fricking everywhere. He got away with the fixture and maybe 4 pairs of glasses. I've got a lot more of these if you guys want them. Yes, please, my goodness, that thief of the century is incredible. I wonder how much street cred he got for those 4 broken pairs of sunnies, the spinner, and the concussion. Here are the other stories that this author promised us. I watched a girl buy a gumball from our machine, proceeded to chew it and stick it to a dress, and then go back to her mum. Once we confronted her about it, she replied, "I didn't do that," and we told her we had it on camera, and she changed it to, "I shouldn't have done that." Turns out her mum just told her not to buy a gumball and was livid. She immediately stopped what she was doing and left with her daughter in tow and told us she'd handle it at home. Never saw them again. Was closing one night, and when we went to roll down the blast door, a giant 3-foot snake fell out of it. Luckily, it was already dead. No one believed us until we played the footage. I've watched people come in, purposefully damage merchandise, then point it out to an employee and try to buy it at a discount. Watched one chick take $800 worth of merchandise into a fitting room and come out with a full shopping bag. When she tried to leave, she ran into someone she knew and decided to wander the store for an hour with them before attempting to leave again. Watched a guy pop the curb in his 4x4 truck and drive all the way to the doors so that his wife could hop out and run in, since it was raining. People are just weird, man. I work weekends at a hospital for a security company with hundreds of cameras all over the hospital. I frequently am assigned to be the officer who watches cameras in the rooms of patients under observation, when they have threats to themselves or nursing staff, and we have access to all the files in our archives. Let me preface my main story with some of the shorter stories from my tenure. There was a patient just snapping and bashing a security guard's head against the doorframe and spilling his blood all over the floor, the Super Bowl, pointed at a waiting TV area, a woman taking a staple out of a book binding, pricking her wrist in a self-deletion attempt, a man on bath salts who came in with his girlfriend's finger in his mouth, screaming in agony because he thought the staff were aliens trying to commit the unspeakable act on him, another guy dropped off in the lobby who had bled out in seconds from a stabbing wound, a clinically dead patient who had taken too much smack, on a stretcher coming back to life flailing like a zombie, hundreds of nurses flirting with doctors and male nurses, nurses with dying patients checking Instagram, we have good cameras, a self-deletion archive, a 150-pound, 5'7" security guard taking down a 6'4", 250-pound patient, dozens of old people falling on their way out of the hospital after being treated for falling. We should note that wheelchairs are always offered in these cases. But anyway, on to our main event. The most bizarre thing I've ever seen in the archives is one of the patients under observation escaping security and making it all the way to his car, completely starkers. This guy was admitted for reasons that I've only heard secondhand. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and he looked normal compared to most of the psychiatric patients that come to the ER. Most likely delusional and a danger to himself, but the key to his story was that he came to the hospital for help with his problems, but didn't know that by telling us he was thinking of self-deleting, that a doctor would order him under observation and he'd be unable to leave the hospital whenever he wished. Now, the process of getting care for mental health issues in an emergency room can take hours because the specialized staff are off-site, and only one is present on campus at any given time. He decided that he couldn't wait and that coming to the ER was a mistake, so he decided to escape. However, this particular patient was smarter than your average case. He took note of the cameras, the angles of each one, and watched the other patients nearby intently as they were escorted by security to a completely stripped special bathroom. As the security guard in the small room that joined with his and a few other patients' rooms opened a door to the adjacent hall where the bathroom was located, the guard would immediately turn his or her attention to the other patients.
Next to the bathroom was another observation room, but that guard was usually seated. Both of these officers, he seems to gather from the smirk on his face, weren't allowed, under any circumstances, to leave their posts unless removed. Anyone running from this officer would have a huge head start before a free officer could be summoned over the radio. All he had to do was get out of reach of the nearest one, and they wouldn't be able to follow. There was one problem with this. The bathroom door opened up towards the seated guard in the hallway. Apparently this guy had devised a solution to his problem and asked the first guard to use the bathroom. Everything went as planned from his point of view. Guard number 1 opened the door, let him walk to the hall, and then went back to the other patients. Guard number 2 remained seated and watched to make sure he actually went in. So he's in the bathroom for almost 10 minutes, and the guard in the hall notices but doesn't change anything about his routine. While the patient was in the bathroom, no camera, he stripped completely down, lubed up his entire body in a thick layer of hand soap and water, and the now fully lubricated patient, I imagine, took a deep breath and flung open the door as hard as he could. The camera files show the seated guard almost falling back out of his rolling chair in surprise. He hadn't even come to terms with the fact that he was going to have to grab a curiously shiny au naturel man when the guy made 5 long strides down the hall at full speed and turned the corner toward the waiting room. The patients in the waiting room just froze in shock, and the guards by the entrance and exit started running toward him. Half a dozen nurses and half a dozen security guards grabbed at him with gloved hands, but every single one of them came up with nothing. None of them could get in front of him, and any attempt to grab the lubed-up streaker failed. Some guards were holding their heads, mouthing, "What the frick?" and others were in full sprint after him. He made it in under 30 seconds out of the hospital and out of the sidewalk that led to the parking garage. He made it all the way to his car, but no further. You see, his keys were in his pants. In short, undressed patient under observation, greased up their entire body in the bathroom and slipped away from security and sprints through the ER to his car, but doesn't have his keys. My God, he must have been embarrassed. What do you even do when you're at that point? Walk back in and apologize? Ask if you can reset and try again? Great story, though. Years ago, when I worked overnight in retail, we had a guy take a Hallmark bag out of the gift card aisle, fill it to the brim with pregnancy tests, and then head towards the exit. He did this big looping arm swing to get the bag over the security antennas, but it didn't work. When the alarm went off, he broke into a run with his arm still straight up and slammed into the entrance door face first while simultaneously sidearm punching the door lintel above his head. He made it out with most of the loot, though. Left behind 3 or 4 pregnancy tests on the floor and some very nice face and fist prints. My coworker and I spent the next months arguing about what he could possibly want with that many pregnancy tests. The most popular theory was that he wanted to be really, really sure about something, but personally I think he just planned to sell them at a discount to a bodega somewhere. Haha, this reminds me of a story when I was a teenager and the PS2 came out. Me and some friends watched a guy shove one in the front of his pants with the box and everything and try to casually walk out of the front door. When he knew he was busted, he tried to run, but it turned into a weird waddle where he fell face first onto the pavement. I've got 2 decent ones. This is at our backup data center in the suburbs in a commercial office park. Dead quiet, no one even there. Cops mostly chill in the parking lot to sleep, basically. During lunch, this one guy parks in the back and starts eating his lunch. Then the door opens, he runs into the back of the truck, runs back to the door to grab the bag from his lunch, drops his pants, and lets loose a torrent of brown. He just explodes in the middle of the parking lot. There was no way those pants remained unscathed. Then he wipes his butt with his lunch bag. What lunch did he have, you might ask? It was from Portillo's. Personally, I love Portillo's. That bag did not deserve the fate it was given. This was an amazing video and captivated the entire IT staff of like 50 people for at least an hour of reruns. Another time we hired a cleaning service to clean that same office. A guy shows up in a really crappy car, like 18 years old, and parks in back. He then pulls out a giant glass pipe and goes to town for about 10 minutes. We were watching this and laughing, and we call up our man on site, and when this kid comes inside to work, we ask our employee, what does he smell like? So we called up the firm that sent him. It's a small business. Our guy knows the owner, actually. So we're listening to this one side of the conversation, and it goes like this. Hey, Bob, so the cleaning guy showed up. Yep, he's here. Hey, let me ask you something. Do you know this guy really well? Oh, So he's your son? Well, this is awkward.
What are your all-you-can-eat buffet horror stories? I boss at a slightly nicer restaurant. On Fridays and Saturdays, we offer a prime rib and crab leg buffet, among a salad bar, hot and cold entrees, and a dessert bar. It's honestly pretty nice, and our buffet runner keeps anyone from doing ungodly things to the buffet. But the one incident that will always stand out to me was when this family of 5 came in. From the moment they came in to the moment they left, they ate as many crab legs as they possibly could. Their server and I were clearing plates off as fast as we could, but every time we'd return it, it seemed like another mountain of crab leg shells would appear in front of each member of that family. I know not how they ate so much, and I honestly can't recall if they ate anything besides the crab. Piles upon piles of shells were left upon the table after they left. It was truly a sight to behold. What's more is after I wiped down the table and came back with settings, I had to get another rag to wipe down the table again because something in the crab leg juice combined with our sanitizer and left a nice milky residue upon the table. Delicious. When I leave this job, I'll never be able to look at crab legs the same way. I had a buddy who was 400 pounds and the guy could put away some food. He went to a casino buffet that was one of the higher end ones that had crab legs and steak. On his 4th or 5th plate stacked full of crab legs, the manager came out and gave him $250 in free slot play to leave the buffet. There were 2 other guys there and none of them were under 300 pounds. They killed a metric frick ton of food between them, and my friend was putting those other 2 guys to shame. The buffet was higher end, so it was $50 a person, but they easily all ate probably 3 to 4 times that, and my friend probably ate 8 to 10 times worth that in food. He then went on to win just over $100 with that free slot play as well. If you can't beat the casinos at the games, beat them at the bar or buffet. It would have been sick if it held out for more. The frick you talking about, boss? I'm just getting started. I'm gonna surf and turf this motherfricker into the ground unless I see 4 of those vouchers. Years ago, I worked at an all-you-can-eat country buffet in South Carolina. I was a busboy. One day I went to a table. It was a mess, as per usual. It looked to be a large family or group of families of about 12 people or so. The thing that stuck in my memory, though, is that whenever they'd finished with what they were going to eat, they'd scrape their plate and use it again. Scrape their plates onto the floor next to the chairs. So next to each chair there was a 6 to 18-inch pile of chicken bones, crab legs, mashed potatoes, and remnants of baked potatoes, among other things. It was just disgusting. I mean, I know that this was a thing that feasting nobles supposedly did in the Middle Ages, or maybe that was throwing the bones over the shoulders? I just don't understand how this time-traveling Duke and his family ended up in South Carolina of all places. A woman came in with 2 of her kids and had a pretty regular meal. You pay when you leave at our place, and she decided to sneak out with her younger daughter before paying, leaving her underage son alone at the table. We caught on pretty quickly and sent someone after her, who found her in her car in the parking garage, waiting for her son to come as well. She refused to come back and pay, so we had to keep her son hostage until the police came to handle the situation. What some people will do to their kids, I swear. We also found out from her son that she'd stolen one of the manager's keycards and they'd regularly come into the hotel and use the card to go swimming on the top floor pool. She was smart, I'll give her that, but still. My first job was as a dishwasher in an all-you-can-eat fried catfish buffet. People are animals, especially the ones that get far more food off the buffet than they can eat. Then they take the leftovers and pile them on a plate or tray, cover it in ketchup or tartar sauce, then pour their iced tea over the top of that. A lot of the people who did that got at least 2 plates like that a night. Nothing made me hate people like bussing or dishwashing on buffet night at the pizza place I worked at in college. What the frick? Serving the after-church crowd is pretty high up there, though. Jesus Christ himself would have never changed a dirty diaper on the table and left it there, okay, lady? I went as a customer to a Golden Corral. I'm walking to the chocolate fountain, and 3 little girls stepped in front of me, and all 3 of them just went hands deep in the fountain. The family was the first table by the fountain, and all they did was laugh about how cute it was. Employees turned it off immediately. Say what you will about Golden Corral, but they definitely don't play around when it comes to their chocolate fountains. Feels like every story that I hear about them is, fountain was closed because some little crapbag decided to Augustus Gloop the thing. Sure, you might find boogers in their meatloaf, but if someone sneezes on the fountain side of the restaurant, that thing gets shut down like it's Madagascar.
The buffet where I live got shut down for serving coyote meat and labeling it as other meats. I picked up some fish and chips recently. I saw that they had all-you-can-eat on Wednesdays. So I asked, what's the most that someone ever… and I was cut off. 18 pieces of fish and 3 plates of fries every single Wednesday, she said, holding up this huge platter to demonstrate the plate size for the chips. So he eats that exact order every week? Yeah, and then he goes to different all-you-can-eats every day of the week. He got banned from the Chinese place down the road. My parents owned an all-you-can-eat buffet, and I was there every day of my life from 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. My favorite horror story is when a couple came in to eat, obviously. They loved crab legs, and every time my mum puts them out, they took everything. Also, just a reminder, crab legs are expensive. Forget the other customers, these two just took it and ate it all. So they're there for maybe 2 hours now and it's getting dark. They've eaten through at least a week's stock of crab legs and my mum finally decides it's enough. She stops putting it out in the buffet and brings individual plates to the customers who wanted it but couldn't get any due to this couple. The couple was livid. They literally flipped the chairs at their table, flipped their plates, bowls, cups, and completely trashed their area. Food was all over the floor, the tables, the chairs. Sticky soda was dripping into the carpet. They left in a hurry, but someone caught their license plate. We called the cops, and I think they charged them with something. I can't remember the aftermath details clearly because I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I'm 20 now. I just remember looking at the mess and feeling really angry that my sister and I had to clean it up with our mum. It was a family-run business, so we didn't have much help. Anyway, that's my horror story. The end. We had a Chinese buffet shut down for a health code violation, which was the employee was cutting veggies while taking a dump. To this day, I still wonder if that means the guy brought a bucket into the kitchen or veggies into the crapper, and honestly, I don't know which is worse. At one point, myself and 2 other family members worked at a Golden Corral, each in a different section, because small towns don't have a lot of job options for high school or college-age kids. I worked in the bakery, which was surprisingly low in horror stories other than the chaos that remained after a large group of children came through. My brother worked the steak section. He got these regulars who would tip him pretty well if he'd prepare blue steaks for them. The very idea of ordering blue steaks from a buffet just, makes me gag. My cousin worked the salad bar. Management would require her to keep seafood items on the bar for long after the point where they'd be safe to consume. I think the record was chilled shrimp from Mother's Day that stayed for over a week and a half. They finally caved and let her toss them when a customer complained about the smell. Oh, sweet God. And the fact that they didn't change the buffet until then implies that people were happily eating the shrimp there right up until that point, and presumably chucking their guts out in the bathroom afterwards. That's our second Golden Corral mention here, a restaurant I hadn't heard of until today, and will probably now steer clear of. Not a buffet, but I worked at a pizza bar/parlor that offered a lunch buffet of endless pizza. The lunch ran from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. This gentleman comes in, I think he was homeless. He serves up a sky-high plate of pizza and just goes to town. He stayed from the beginning to the very end to make sure he got his money's worth. Well, his body didn't appreciate being stuffed like a piñata of pizza. He got up and waddled fast to the bathroom, and next thing I know, I'm being told that he had liquid crap trailing behind him to the bathroom and inside the same room. I was informed by my boss about the incident. I told him I was just heading out for a break. I was not about to clean that up. Not a worker, but I went to Hometown Buffet, and the kid in front of me was slightly shorter than the buffet bar, but had his hands in the yellow jello, just massaging it. Then his mum came by and snatched him away, but didn't say anything while a guy came and made himself a bowl of jello. 10-year-old me was too appalled to say anything. I haven't eaten jello since then. I was once at an old country buffet, waiting patiently to get some mac and cheese. The kid in front of me piled his plate high and then started tapping the serving spoon to get all of the cheesy goodness free from the confines of the spoon. Once he was satisfied with his handiwork, he licked said spoon clean. I didn't have any mac and cheese and I haven't been back since. I didn't work at an all-you-can-eat buffet, but my sister did. The buffet itself was on the first floor, so you had to either take the stairs or the elevator to your seat. Once there was a lady who was carrying a tray with a whole lot of stuff on it downstairs. Glasses, plates, and a whole lot more junk. My sister asked the lady if she needed any assistance, to which the lady replied, "You assume because I'm fat I need help?"
My sister didn't react. A few seconds later, the lady fell down the stairs, there was blood and food everywhere. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a coworker that briefly managed Orion's buffet. He said it was fairly common for people to gorge themselves and then purge in the restroom and start eating again so that they could get their money's worth. So I work in an all-you-can-eat using tablets. This is, according to my boss, based on a Japanese kind of restaurant. We serve mostly Asian food, from Chinese to Japanese and even some Korean. The premise is that people order their food in rounds and then we bring the food to their table when it's ready. We always warn customers beforehand that if they leave food behind because they ordered too much, they'll still have to pay, depends on what they left behind. We've seen people try the weirdest stuff if it comes to not paying. People dumping food in their handbags, people shoving it in their mouths, then going to the loo and flushing it, putting hair on it and blaming us for it. We've seen them pull this stuff on camera, and when we actually catch them doing it, they blame us for it and refuse to pay. Someone let it come down to the police to sort it out sometimes. There have been multiple occasions on which they were involved to solve the problem for just €5. I guess some people's greed has no extent. A college friend works at a Chinese buffet. He said they caught a regular dipping pizza in the wonton soup, like in the queue and not at his table and eating it right there at the buffet. Bite, dip, bite, dip, bite, dip. After the fourth time in a month he did it, management finally kicked him out. Not a worker, but I once saw a grown man have a childlike meltdown over the fact that he showed up to soup plantation too late and missed out on the biscuits and gravy. A long time ago, my mum and I picked a friend of hers up and we went to a local Chinese food buffet. This place had a thing where you could get a pound of food for $5 in a takeout container instead of sitting and eating at the restaurant if you want. So that was our plan. The three of us were browsing around the buffet line with our takeout containers, adding what we wanted to them, and then I noticed that my friend's mum was doing something frickin' disgusting. He was eating a chicken wing, like right in front of the buffet line, hiding his face behind his takeout container. And then he took the chicken bone and put it back in the buffet tray. I walked over to my mum and told her what he was doing, and at first she thought I was joking. So she walked over to him and now he's standing there eating a slice of watermelon right off the buffet and then putting the rind back in the tray. So my mum was like, "What the frick are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, don't worry, I do this all the time. They never notice." Of course, both me and mum are panicking, worried that they're going to call the cops or something because of this idiot. We basically pretended not to know him and continued to fill up our containers the right way. After a couple of minutes, one of the employees walks up to my mum and tells her that they noticed what the guy was doing, and they noticed we were also uncomfortable about it and didn't intend to blame us. But they warned her that if she doesn't get him to pay for the food in his container and to leave immediately, they'll be calling the cops. So of course my mum tells him that we need to go, and he just brushes it off like, "I don't care, they're not going to do anything." Well, me and my mum walked up to the front, paid for our containers, apologized, and walked out and left him there. A minute later, you could see and hear him shouting at the staff. He throws his container on the ground and food splatters everywhere. He storms out, shouting insults as he leaves, and of course gives them a, "I'm never coming back," to which they reply, "You're not allowed in here no more, we'll call the cops." So we're standing out by the car waiting for him, and of course we yell at him for being a piece of crap. We get in the car, and the next thing you know, this mother fricker starts pulling chicken wings and Chinese donuts out of his frickin' pockets and eating them. We dropped him off at home and never spoke to him again. That is the definition of one of those moments in life where you realize that you need new friends. I have to believe that maybe you hadn't hung out with him that much before if you didn't realize that something was a bit quirky about him. I managed a buffet in a casino in Reno for a few months. Had this family come in, mum, dad, 2 little kids. I got called over to the table because the mum had chucked up on her plate the table and wanted us to take it away and clean things up. I asked if she was okay, and she said she always blows chunks when she eats cheese. She had gotten herself an enchilada. It was a Mexican theme night. What the frick, lady? Enchiladas pretty much always have cheese. I told her I'd have to call janitorial because none of my staff was trained to handle biohazards. She didn't understand why I couldn't just take it. Janitorial came and couldn't clean up because she refused to move from the table, so janitorial left. She calls me over and starts yelling at me. Dad starts yelling too.
Apparently she wanted to keep eating after chucking up, which I thought was really gross. I had them sit at another table so they could all keep eating. Janitorial came back and cleaned the other table. Finally, they go to leave and decide to make a huge scene in front of the restaurant and demand their money back. I refuse. The dad gets in my face and starts shouting that I'm just a racist white B-word, and his wife makes loads more money than I do. I call security and they storm out, pulling pictures off the wall and shattering them on the floor. And Dad also picked up a vase and broke it. The two kids were running around and banging on the walls. Security finally shows up after they ran off. I had to do a report, and they were put on the 86 list. I frickin' hate people. I was standing behind a woman at a hometown buffet. She was getting lasagna or something, basically a really cheesy pasta thing that when you lift the serving utensil, a lot of cheese hangs on. I witnessed her lift her pasta, twirl all the excess cheese that was connected around her index finger, and there was a lot, clip it off with her thumbnail and then fling it back into the pasta dish. I knew I shouldn't have been at hometown buffet in the first place, but this solidified my stance to never go back. I worked as a server at a Chinese buffet, and 4 things come to mind instantly. First, a middle-aged woman who chucked up on her table and blamed it on giving herself the wrong insulin dose. The 4 mountains of food she destroyed probably contributed too. Profusely apologized and tipped me $1. 2, I tried to pick up a dirty plate off a table that had a big pile of hibachi sauce and grease on it. The customer stopped me and said, "That's the best part," and then proceeded to drink the sauce like it was the milk after a bowl of cereal. A young mother complained to me because the crab meat and cheese that we serve on the buffet made her child sick and they threw up. Her child was an infant, not even a year old. I'm no childcare expert, but baked artificial crab meat and mozzarella can't be good for a baby. The restaurant was also raided by ICE one morning shortly before opening. The entire back of house and one of our managers were deported. Back of the house was half Chinese and half Latin American. I was just a witness, but I saw how a woman came in with about 5 kids and she made them all sit at a table while she got food, even if they seemed old enough to get it themselves. She just grabbed 2 trays, placed 3 plates on both of them, and literally poured all the chicken nuggets onto one plate, so it was a huge mountain. She did the same to the other 5 dishes and left 5 pans that were full or almost full before she came, empty. Needless to say, people were annoyed, especially when she did it multiple times with other dishes, and would glare at people if she saw them taking food from dishes that she probably wanted. At one point, I worked for a pizza place that used to have a day buffet that I'd make pizzas for. One time, 2 huge guys came in the moment we opened for the buffet. The manager on duty dropped the first 2 pizzas down on the buffet, turned to grab the next 2, turned back, and both pizzas were gone. A few minutes later, both guys walked back up and each took an entire pizza again and walked back to continue eating. They proceeded to do this over and over, grabbing an entire pizza each for themselves for the entire 3 hours that we were offering the buffet. That was one hell of a day. Okay, and to answer some of the questions I'm being asked, they were big as in morbidly obese, and Pizza Hut 2011 with regular dough. Not thin crust, medium pizzas, which were 12 inches, you get the idea. I used to work at an all-you-can-eat buffet. I'd usually be the one who cleans up after people once closing hours had passed. Essentially, I was the de facto janitor of the place. This one time, I had to clean the bathrooms after the place closed. No problems in the female bathrooms, but when I went into the male restroom, the image was burned into my retina instantly. An old man was lying on the floor, face down in a puddle of muck. Not just any sewage muck, but opaque black muck. It had the color of motor oil. It smelled awful too, like a mixture of doo-doo and rotting durian. It certainly didn't help that the liquid wasn't just smeared all over the floor, but spread across the walls too. There were frickin' handprints across the wall, presumably when the geezer was trying to stand himself up. I peered into the toilet. There was more of that brown liquid, along with chunks of corny doo-doo. There's also this fluid in your digestion called chyme. It's basically the thing right before food turns into brown, the pulpy, acidic liquid with partially digested food in it. I could see scraps of chicken breast and sauce mixed in there with the pulpy chyme. As for the old guy, well, it turns out he didn't merely faint, he had actually deceased. I was in a room with a fresh, decomposing body in the stages of algor mortis. He had his pants off, presumably he had crapped himself to death, but I don't know. The guy had emptied himself like one of those cement mixers you'd see in a cartoon, except you just replace the cement with a liquid that embodies death itself. Needless to say, I, like him, emptied my digestive contents, just from the opposite end that he did. After that, I quit. Screw that place, man. There was a fairly expensive restaurant in Dallas in the 80s called Southern Kitchen. About $25 per person back then with the food served to the table. Really good stuff. They were famous for cinnamon rolls. The owner said he'd seen many women ruin expensive purses hiding those rolls. Man, I miss that place. The professor of my college microbiology class was also a director at the state health department in charge of inspecting restaurants. The first thing she told us on day one was never, ever eat at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What out-of-control situation did nobody call emergency services about? My co-worker's story of how he found out he had a heart defect jumps out for me. He used to ride his bike to work all the time at his old job. One day, just on his road to work, he drops on the side of the road, fainting. He was out for an hour or so before he came to. He was pretty beat up, nothing major but cuts and bruises everywhere. When he came to, no one was around him. People were just driving by and walking around. No one stopped to help, no one stopped to call an ambulance. He went to the doctor and got surgery done for an artificial heart valve. This one was only a few years back. Driving along a suburban road one night, and a guy wearing only his undies ran up to our cop car and threw a very large sofa cushion at us. As we slowed down to find out why he had thrown said cushion, he tried to jump into the back of the car. We got out and had a chat with the poor guy who told us that he had used about an 8-ball of poor quality booger sugar and wanted to get our attention to help him. Kicker was he'd been running around the suburban streets all crazed for about 30 minutes and nobody thought it was odd enough to call us. To be fair, it wasn't the nicest area. I was responding to a disturbance call in a trailer park that turned out to be BS. As I was leaving, I noticed a giant puddle of blood on the ground near a different trailer. Upon further inspection, I realized that there was blood all over one of the doors, complete with smeared handprints and blood dripping off the doorknob. It looked like a frickin' massacre. I started pounding on the door, and then this junkie comes out and starts yelling at me for waking her up. I ask her if she's hurt, and she said she wasn't. She then proceeds to go nuts about all the blood. She has no idea where it came from. I followed the ungodly amount of red stuff to a trailer about a block down where there was a giant party taking place. I ask the group of guys standing outside where the injured person is, and they all go G-code on me and say that they don't know what I'm talking about, while standing in the blood trail. I push past and continue down the road to Oz, where at the end of it I find a guy in what used to be an all-white outfit that's now dark red attempting to control his massive head bleed on his own. I later discovered that he'd been trying to break into that other trailer when he drunkenly cut his head on the window that he broke out. That's an awful lot of blood loss. I can't imagine blocking off authorities from that sort of medical emergency, no matter how much you distrust the popo. Wild. There was a quadruple murder in a residential area here in Sweden back in 1980, with several witnesses that heard and saw the incident. The attacker shot a girl by accident and then shot another guy in the following moments. They fired a total of 12 shots over the course of several hours. Shanked 2 others to death with a kitchen knife, he finished everything off with dragging the girl outside because he felt guilty for killing her, so that someone would find her and call the paramedics, but realized while dragging her that she was gone and nothing could be done, so he threw her down an elevator shaft. The whole ordeal lasted for 4 hours and nobody called the cops, even though 12 shots were fired and screams were heard. The killer was arrested 2 days later and was killed 18 years later by the son of the first guy that got killed. Former law enforcement officer. I worked a late shift and was driving home and decided to stop for some breakfast at a Waffle House. I noticed a few people flagging me down as I pulled into the parking lot, which was shared by an auto repair shop. They pointed me to the back, so I pulled over and turned my spotlight on. On the back side of the repair shop, there was a dumpster, and there was a man laying down beside it behind the fence. I could see his feet. Then another homeless man walked out with a bowl and literally walked right by my car towards the Waffle House. This guy was soaked, by the way. So I walked over to the man laying down and he was unresponsive. I call in and the EMTs arrive and this guy is definitely gone. I still have to this day no idea how or why. I have the homeless guy waiting for me next to the Waffle House and I ask him what happened and said, "He was out cold. I was pouring water on him to keep him warm." Video from the auto shop shows the guy walking and collapsing next to the dumpster. He wasn't shot or anything, so who knows, heart attack, stroke, something, and then just laying there for 45 minutes. The homeless guy walked over to a water hose beside the Waffle House, filled a bowl up and poured water on him because it was slightly cool outside and didn't want him to get too cold.
The water was from a cold faucet, by the way. Literally nothing ever came close to the weirdness of that night in my entire career. Paramedic here. My partner and I were at our post, which was in the parking lot of a strip mall that had a bunch of stores and one bar, which was known to be pretty sketchy. My partner was taking a little nap, it was around 1 a.m., and I was watching a movie on my phone, waiting for a call. Eventually, I notice a few people coming out of the bar and just sort of lingering in the parking lot. A few more people come out, one lights up a cigarette, and they all just stand around. I go back to my movie, and 20 minutes later I notice that there's now a much larger group lingering outside of the bar. Nothing strange was happening, but I thought it was weird that they'd been there for so long, so I decided to check it out. I woke up my angry partner to have him pull our rig closer to the group. As we approach with our lights on, the group notices us and starts to break apart. A few people scatter, and I see that in the middle of the group there's a person on the ground motionless. My partner and I jump out and ask what's going on. Someone in the group goes, "This guy is wasted, man. He just stumbled out here and fell asleep on the ground." I shout to the man on the ground and he doesn't respond. I check for a pulse, and there is none. I start CPR while my partner gets out our jump bag and notifies dispatch. For a full 30 minutes, people had just stood around looking at this dead guy on the ground, some smoking cigarettes and none doing anything about it. There wasn't even a noticeable commotion. No one asked if he'd needed help or called anyone, and they probably never would have. The guy was cool to the touch by the time we got to him and down for at least 30 minutes. We went through the motions, but there was no saving him. We transported and he was pronounced at the hospital within 15 minutes. How frickin' hard is it to ask someone if they're okay or dial 911? How was not a single person in that group not alarmed by seeing a man sleeping on the ground in a parking lot? I've had similar variations of this scene happen at least 3 times while on duty. People just don't give a frick. Part of my job is to inspect and investigate issues in child and daycare centers. Staff members duct-taped a 1-year-old toddler to a chair because they wouldn't sleep at nap time. One staff member witnessed the other staff do this to the child. 3 other staff saw the child taped to the chair. The owner saw it as well. No one said anything or reported to the police. My office is civil, not criminal. I called the local jurisdiction and submitted all the documentation I'd found. The parent picked up the child and couldn't figure out why the child's clothes had sticky residue on them. Boy, was she surprised when she'd learned what happened to her baby. This is pretty common where I work. No one calls the police. Probably the most extreme was a shots fired call, extremely common on a certain street that we don't really go down without backup. We drive through and don't see anything, then maybe 10 minutes later we get an anonymous call about a shootout inside a vacant house. We find the door wide open, covered in blood. We make entry and find an absolute bloodbath. Blood, drugs, and casings everywhere. We recover a piece that had been fired, and there was evidence people had been dragged out. We only got the one call about it, and no one showed up at the hospital later, shot. The narrator did do a bit of digging to see where this author was from, and all I can say, it's wild enough that this can happen anywhere in the world without injured or deceased persons showing up on some sort of register, and the fact that it can happen in a first world country is even more mind-blowing. Where the frick are our social priorities at? I'm not in law enforcement anymore, but I was for about 12 years in a large city. When I was a patrolman, I got a call about someone firing off fireworks in a strip mall at 2 a.m. These were common calls, so we'd usually just go to check the area and clear the call. I checked the parking lot and didn't find anything, but I noticed the lights were on at one of the strip mall businesses. I won't say what business it was, but it was owned by a pretty prominent local businessman. Anyways, I go out to check and found the front door unlocked, which in itself was suspicious. We had a lot of burglaries in that area, so I asked dispatch to call a rep for the business. I was clearing the building and found the owner and several other people, all really prominent, in a back room where a poker table was set up. One of the guys was sitting down and had a pile of coats on his lap, which was really weird, and he was acting like he was in pain. I saw blood droplets under his chair and asked him what was wrong. He broke down and moved the coats and then revealed he had a massive bullet wound in his thigh. Long story short, these guys had a high-stakes poker game every week and someone tried to rob it and things went sideways. The guy robbing it shot this guy in the leg, which some citizen heard and called in a fireworks call. The guys involved in the game weren't going to call the cops and were arranging to have a doctor come in and treat him off the books because gambling is illegal in the state that I worked in, but we honestly wouldn't have given a crap. We actually caught the guy that did it, but the DA wouldn't prosecute because the victim and witnesses didn't want to testify or be involved. The victim recovered fine. One of the guys who I interviewed told me they were robbed of over 30 grand. Oh, there are so many. There's the usual drive-by shootings, gang violence and stuff. Then there's the infuriating things like the domestic matters. Though, to be completely honest, the most absurd situation in which no one called the police or 911 was when my crazy neighbors across the street had their father-in-law have a heart attack on their front lawn during a barbecue. The guy's son was having the mother of all tantrums, shoving people, screaming, rolling on the ground, pulling up grass. They literally broke a window, all while shrieking at the top of his voice, "Please God, don't take my dad!" The other relatives allowed this spectacle to unfold before their eyes while they formed a semicircle around this dude's seemingly lifeless body. I finally looked out of my window, opened it, and shouted if anyone had called 911. I got about 20 blank stares. I called for them, and the crazy son tried to attack the paramedics while they were loading his dad into the ambulance. Called the cops for them as well. Common sense just really isn't all that common as it turns out. The dad didn't make it. The party just resumed once the son got carted off in cuffs and the ambulance had left. The son was definitely old enough to know better. He was in his early to mid-30s at the time of his tantrum.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
Started my 4 to midnight shift by heading directly to get a coffee. Beautiful summer, people everywhere. I pull into the parking space and see a guy just lying on the ground in front of a park bench. I jumped out of my cruiser, grabbed my first aid bag, and called it in. The guy was conscious but not really responsive. It sounds like a movie, but we were doing the old "blink if you can hear me" deal. The rescue finally arrived and took him to the hospital. I found out later that the guy had suffered a grand mal seizure and was still postictal when I rolled up on him. The frustrating part was the dozens of people milling around that couldn't even bother themselves to call 911, never mind find out if the guy was okay. There was a video a while back, and I'm sure other similar ones floating around, of a woman in public transit who appeared to be on something. Swaying side to side, drooling, spaced out look. People were making nasty comments and her young daughter was crying hysterically. Turns out the lady was having a seizure. No one wanted to get involved to see if she was okay. It was easier to say nasty things and film her. Seizures aren't always falling on the ground and flailing. They can include symptoms that look like the person is on something. People with diabetes can also have similar reactions with low blood sugar. My brother-in-law was on his way home from the night shift a few months ago and happened to drive past a house that was just casually on fire. He ran up to the door, beat on it with no answer, broke the door down, and ended up rescuing a woman and her children. I'm not sure how many kids there were. They were all fast asleep and had no idea the house was on fire. My apartment got broken into a few years ago. It was one of those off-campus college apartments. We called the police, who came at about 4:30 a.m. Our neighbors were playing loud music, which was pretty typical for them. When they arrived, they were taking the report when the officer I was talking to asked if our neighbors were always that loud, and I told him it was only on Saturday and Thursdays, and how it didn't really bother us. But before the cops left, they knocked and pounded until the neighbors finally answered. When they opened the door, there was a horse or donkey in the living room, several studio cameras, and 3 or 4 people who were apparently filming a donkey show. I know those cops were probably expecting some green herb and maybe a few minors drinking, but not a frickin' donkey show. You know, given how a lot of these other stories have gone, I was expecting a dead body, maybe an untreated medical episode happening ignored in the middle of the floor. I didn't expect that, so well done, guys. I do mountain bike patrol in a small, medium-sized city. Was just riding one morning just after rush hour and I spotted a little kid, probably about 3 or 4 years old, standing on the side of the road with no parents in sight. I stopped and asked him where his parents were, and he just kinda shrugged. Called it in, and some guy ran out of some townhomes across the street and said the little dude was standing there for a few hours and the guy in the house was watching him to keep an eye on him. There were people around and everything, but we never got a call for it. Long story short, this kid had just wandered out of the room he and his mum were staying in nearby and wandered onto the street. The place was a shelter for women, and he was able to get past the manager and a court police officer. The mum had passed away from too many substances 3 days prior, and when the little guy got hungry, he went out of the room and wandered out to the street. No one even went to check on her either, despite the smell. Because some people have asked, I'll clarify this shelter wasn't a homeless shelter, it was a shelter designed to house domestic victims. Women and children who temporarily had nowhere else to go. Mostly, it was designed to help bring them into the system by giving them a place to stay until their social workers and caseworkers could get them better accommodations. Kind of like a more secure hotel. The women were free to leave and do their own thing, and there wasn't a full service staff like in a homeless shelter or rehab facility. To finish, please go out and push your legislators and the people in power to fix our healthcare and rehabilitation system. Many millions of people suffer from our lack of ability to help those in need, especially the mentally ill and the neglected members of our society. Push for the end of the war on substances to stop the cycle. I'm an EMT. We were waiting at a light right as we were headed back to the station for our end of the shift. We saw a man running like Usain Bolt across the crosswalk to beat the light and a woman chasing him. My partner and I both look at each other and he says, "She's gonna get hit." And sure as crap, the car in the rightmost lane just guns it as the light turns green, and the next thing we see is flip-flops flying and a pair of legs in the air. The female was plowed over and landed on her face in the street. We immediately turn on our lights and hop out of the ambulance. When we get to this lady, she's unconscious, she's gone number 1 in herself, and is bleeding from multiple lacerations on her limbs and a nasty head wound. My partner, who is a paramedic, starts his assessment as I go to grab a backboard and C-collar and call it into dispatch. She wakes up and immediately starts screaming about her boyfriend leaving her. She stands up and tries to run after him and face plants onto the curb and proceeds to lose a tooth. We finally calmed her down enough to get her onto the gurney. Mind you, she wouldn't listen and kept trying to walk around after suffering a couple of head injuries. Once we got her into the back of the ambulance and out of the road into a nearby parking lot, the driver that hit her rolls up. By now, firefighters are on the scene and asking what the heck is going on. We give them the lowdown and my partner tells them that we can handle it, so they leave, confused and somewhat trepidatious. We talk to this woman for a while, insisting that she needs to go to the hospital, but she keeps saying that she can't go and needs to find her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the driver who hit her is apologizing to me and saying that she wants to help any way she can. The woman keeps saying she can't go to the hospital. After we got her cleaned up and bandaged all the wounds, she asks if we can take her to her boyfriend's house. Well, as an EMT, I can do one of two things, either take you to the hospital or leave you where you are. She refuses transport vehemently, so my partner and I tell her we can't take her anywhere. She proceeds to then hop out of the ambulance and ask the driver who just hit her if she would take her to her boyfriend's house if she didn't call the cops. Sure as crap, before we can even radio in that the patient was refusing transport to the hospital, she's rolling away in the car that just hit her and tossed her 8 feet in the air. It's not the craziest story, but one of the few that we just happened to be there for. This is my uncle's story from early 90s Chicago. An elderly couple called in what they said sounded like a shot from the apartment below them. My uncle and his partner arrive on the scene and enter the apartment, weapons drawn. Standard protocol for a possible firefight in progress. Right in the entryway is what's left of a middle-aged Italian gentleman who apparently made the decision to not continue his criminal career by getting himself in the head with a .45. He's obviously gone. According to my uncle, his face was half gone, nose missing, one eye, and the other hanging from what's left of the socket. My uncle's partner goes out to the squad car to radio for the cleanup crew, those guys that come in and scoop up the dead bits, and my uncle is standing in the door making sure no one enters the apartment until they arrive. About 5 minutes pass and my uncle hears what sounds like something moving inside the apartment. He figures the guy probably has a cat or dog. Your pet will eat you if you die, and they are hungry, generally, so he heads to shoo it back away so it doesn't further damage this guy's body. He opens the door and the mother fricker with his face blown in half is standing there. My uncle reached for his sidearm and nearly shot the guy, genuinely thinking he was a zombie or something. And the dude just collapses again. Not like a fall into a slump sort of collapsed, like falling straight back and hitting the ground with a thud. My uncle, after regaining his composure, radios his partner to call for EMS, and then he proceeds to check the guy's pulse. Nothing. When EMS arrived, they said that there was no way the guy should have survived the initial shot, and they would have assumed he was dead too based on the amount of damage. My uncle says in his entire 20-year career, which included several firefights and car chases, that he never felt more scared than when he opened the door and saw that guy, who by all rights should have been dead, just standing there. After reading these posts, one particular instance comes to mind. While working for the MEO, we were called for a badly decomposed decedent. She was in the bathroom of a housing facility. Her remains had leaked into the air ducting and flooring. EMS had been called because someone had slipped and fallen on her liquefaction in the hallway. Look, I realize that a lot of these folks probably had bad run-ins with the police, but to let someone rot like that astounded me. You could smell it from outside the facility, and it took someone injuring themselves to have the authorities called. There's still a pic of me in a ghost suit on our local wall of shame because I ended up in the bathtub after almost adding myself to the injured list while slipping across the bathroom. I moved out of Racine, Wisconsin in the 90s because in the last 3 weeks I lived there were 24 drive-by shootings and 3 of those happened when there were already cops at the scene for unrelated reasons. I was off duty playing poker with some neighbors and friends. One of the guys at the table is a hard-as-nails Vietnam veteran. In the middle of a hand, he downs his glass of scotch, hits himself in the chest and lights a cigarette, stands up and says, "Well, I'm having a heart attack." He then walks out and drives to the hospital. Everyone thought he was joking. Sure enough, he had had and survived a heart attack. Years ago, I was at a wedding and the groom was a cop. There was one guest at the wedding who was the +1 of a friend of the bride. The reception was so much fun, with several hours of open bar at a big hotel. The +1 guest was walking around, inviting people to go out to his car to smoke some of the devil's lettuce. At one point, he walked up to a couple of guys and invited them, to which they responded, "No thanks, we're cops." Damn, that was a fun night. When did you stop, chuckle, and think to yourself, "I'm in danger"? When a car jumped the median and was barreling right towards me doing well over 70. Luckily, horsepower saved me from death. My first instinct was to floor it. At least have them hit the rear door and panels instead of the driver's side door. I was the only one in the car. When I was 7, I was playfully pushing a sheep and he pushed forward. Next thing I know, I'm against a wall, sheep head on my chest, and 5 seconds later I realize he's too strong for me. I literally thought I was going to die right there. Death by floof. Driving 50 miles per hour in a little VW Jetta and a huge SUV was stopped at a crossroad up ahead. Apparently they didn't see me and they started across the road. Thank God I hit the gas instead of the brake or I probably would have T-boned them. Instead, they smashed my back left tire and sent me spinning to a stop in the opposite lane of traffic. It was also really lucky I had no oncoming cars in that moment. Funny though, I was so dazed I remember thinking, who was that screaming? I'm the only one in the car. Then I realized that it was me. Such a strange feeling. A homeless girl grabbed me from a bar and said she needed an ambulance because her friend had taken too much of something. I followed her and started phoning one. She led me to an abandoned building. All that was going through my mind was, someone needs help. When she led me to some stairs, she said we needed to go up them, and my brain finally kicked in and I realized it could easily be a trap. Even if it wasn't, I wasn't going to walk into a smack den, and I was far enough into the building where escape wasn't easy. I leaned over a candle and set my t-shirt on fire. I thought it was really interesting and turned to my friends saying, "Hey, look everyone, my t-shirt's on fire." Fortunately, one of them had more presence of mind than I did and put it out. About 19,000 feet or 5.7 kilometers up in Tanzania. Felt incredibly drowsy while taking a rest and I started dreaming. The guide slapped me on the arm. "Don't sleep, you die." The chuckle and "I'm in danger" came when I realized I felt so awful that I might actually choose sleep anyway. It was altitude sickness. I chucked up my undigested breakfast 10 minutes later and felt a bit better. Yep, it takes resources for our bodies to turn food into energy. I'm a little concerned about what would happen if you were unable to eat because of the altitude though. Good thing you had a decent guide with you. They're there to save us adventure tourist idiots from ourselves. In Iraq in 2004, my unit was tasked with pushing from Hit to Fallujah in order to find and destroy Muqtada al-Sadar's Mahdi army. In one of the cities we cleared, we were about to assault a 5-story building that Intel had informed us was defended by more than 100 insurgents. We were stacked up outside a medium-high wall that surrounded the building, and I was carrying my saw, which is like a 20-pound weapon. I got a boost over the wall and immediately fell into and got stuck in a thorny bush. I remember thinking, oh man, what a stupid way to die, as I started waiting to get shot at. Turns out that this insurgent stronghold was actually a school with 2 friendly dudes in it. In short, Intel sucks. Later on in that same mission, we were doing a sneaky night patrol and we had to cross a highway that had crash barriers in lines on the median. I tried to roll over the barrier wearing a backpack, and it got perfectly lodged in the space between the barriers. Stuck there like a turtle while I tried to whisper shout to someone to come save me. A smackhead got out of prison and went to visit his girlfriend. She'd moved out about 2 years earlier and I'd moved in. So at 1 a.m. there's a clearly drunk nutjob, possibly also on substances, trying to break down my front door while my wife and kids are asleep, somehow. I hadn't put the bolts on the door yet as I was only just on my way to bed when he turned up. It was kind of funny, but I still got the cricket bat out just in case. Hey, the same thing happened to me. I was walking into my apartment building one day when I saw a guy start to walk in. I'd only been gone like 5 minutes, so I yelled at him, "Get the frick out of my apartment!" So this big Hispanic dude turns back towards me and says he's looking for so-and-so. I tell him they don't live here anymore, even though I occasionally get his junk mail. Big dude tells me he's fresh out of jail and the former resident owes him money. I tell him that's fine, but he doesn't live here anymore. He looks and tells me that my apartment looks like his and that if I'm covering for him, he'll be coming back. I tell the guy that's fine and that I won't see him later because once again, he doesn't live here. There was this time on a school bus, we had a new driver. The area is pretty hilly, and in this route we had the steep 50-foot drop from where the bus turned around with a 3-point turn. But the bus driver just kept backing up. Closer and closer, we almost went off the cliff. I'm sure that if we measured, it was within a foot. I started looking at exits, how fast I could run to the front or the side exit. Man, we were all screaming in terror. Good times. I took an out-of-bounds ski trail that looked fun by myself because intelligence is my strong suit. Came upon a tall cliff with a flat landing that I knew I couldn't make on skis, but I'd come too far to hike back to the main path. Took my skis off, tossed them over, and climbed down. Hurt my legs, but nothing serious. Continued on. Several minutes later, came upon a sign pointing towards a 20-kilometer bike trail ending God knows where. It was around that time I realized I could end up lost in the back country of a ski resort with no cell reception. Decided to hike in the opposite direction the sign was pointing since it was uphill and seemed more likely to take me back to the main trail. After several whispered swears and a good half hour of biking uphill, and across a sketchy-looking wooden bridge, through deep snow in ski boots holding my skis, I arrived at a populated ski run. I now make sure to have someone with me for all backcountry-related adventures. That way, if I die, I can bring them down with me. I was doing aid work in Croatia in the late 90s, only a few years after the war had ended. Our group was staying in a small village about an hour outside of Zagreb, which had been caught up in the conflict. Lots of shelled houses, mines in the countryside. Even the main bridge had been blown up, so residents had to use an army makeshift bridge if they wanted to cross the river. We'd made friends with the locals and they took us down to the river where we had a fun time swimming and mucking about. I totally underestimated the river current and my ability to swim. So I start trying to cross the river and the current just picks me up. Whoosh! And suddenly I'm on my butt trying to swim against it. No deal. When I realized this, I started trying to get footing, but I'm being swept downstream and my feet are literally hitting rocks, no grip at all. It seemed like forever, but it was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I hit a shallow calm patch of the river where I could stand up. When the guys came over, they were telling me it was no big deal, but had I been swept a little bit further down the stream, I would have hit a heavily mined area and probably been blown to bits. I metaphorically crapped myself. That's the closest I've come to losing my life. Really shook me up. I worked as an animator in a hotel. During the season, the mini club daycare is filled with kids, but post-season there's not even one kid in the hotel. So, post-season, one older lady and one middle-aged guy entered the empty daycare. The lady quickly explains to me that this guy is her mentally disabled son, who's mentally around 3 or 4 years old. He saw the daycare and really wanted to play there. Usually I wouldn't accept that, but there were no kids around, so I was actually happy that I'll be occupied for a while. He was really endearing, and we often watched Mickey Mouse DVDs since he was a big fan. After a few days of me hanging out with him, his mother came to pick him up and asked me how he was. I replied that he was nice as always, to which she replied, "Good, because he can get so very violent and aggressive sometimes." It sent chills down my spine, realizing that I was lucky, but that he'll also be coming to the mini club for the rest of their vacation. So there I was, day after day, playing with this guy twice as big as me, completely alone, doing everything he wanted and being more than careful that he just didn't get mad. Look, I get that this elderly woman had spent her lifetime caring and providing for her son at this point, but maybe that's the sort of information you disclose up front if there's any danger involved. Don't just drop him off and peace out even if you feel you deserve to. It's a hard situation to judge people for, but I think at least some warning about moods was warranted. When I decided to explore some lava tubes on an extinct volcano, Rangitoto if you're curious. I did this with no torch and bad footwear. It was extremely dark in there with no cell phone reception. I got completely disoriented and had to feel my way out because my phone was not as bright as I thought. No one knew where I was and I could have been in serious trouble. Stupidest thing that I've done recently. Me and my good friend Felix, both German, were traveling with an interrail ticket through Europe. In Serbia, we were in a train which was going really slow and stopping at every really little town and village. For some reason, the train got shorter and shorter every other station because they were uncoupling a wagon here and there. So everyone moved to the first two wagons because they were most likely to arrive at the final destination. Felix and I were already in the second wagon in a closed cabin where there's a bench on the left and right. We were both sitting on the left bench having a cigarette when things suddenly got intense. 3 obviously drunk men came into that cabin. At first, they only asked for a cigarette, which we gave them, but after a few minutes, they started discussing more and more intensely. I could feel they were talking about us. So I asked Felix, whose father is Serbian, if he could understand them. He was pretty serious at that moment and told me that the 2 of them wanted to rob us, and one wanted to wait until after the train ride. Felix gave me a continuous update about what they were talking about. They were guessing how much money we might have and still discussing when to do the robbery. Their discussion heated up, and at one point they stopped completely. I was wondering what happened, and then suddenly it all went black. We were in a frickin' tunnel. I was totally flexed and expected to get the crap beaten out of me. They were only talking like 3 sentences. I asked Felix, "Are they going to do it now?" He said, "I'm not sure." After what felt like 10 but probably was 2 minutes, the light came back and I was sitting there like a frickin' Jackie Chan on my bench, prepared to fight in the dark. They knew now that we kind of knew. They decided to follow us once we got to our destination so we could kind of chill during the ride. At our destination, we just sprinted into the next taxi and told him to go to the next city as fast as possible. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Calling an Uber in Houston right in the middle of a downpour. As a Brit who was staying there for work, I was only vaguely aware of the dangers of flash flooding, and being from a country with no real inclement weather, I obviously didn't take it as seriously as I should have. As Texas natives will no doubt confirm, when it rains hard there. At least it did that morning. I remember trying to call an Uber on the app, and a few drivers in a row cancelled on me. I was desperately trying to get back to my friend's house. I'd just spent the night with a woman, and I was doing the walk of shame. She did offer me to stay and wait it out at her place, but the rain wasn't too bad at that point and only really became dangerous midway through my journey home. It really did come out of nowhere and she couldn't have known. In any case, it would have been beyond awkward to hang around the whole day with someone I'd literally just met 12 hours previously. I would have swum home through gator-infested waters if I'd had to, so I didn't really have much choice and just persisted in requesting a driver. The guy who eventually did show up was a friendly Nigerian fellow who probably didn't really consider how dangerous it was. In the short journey from the front door to the cab, I got so soaked it looked like I'd been thrown in a lake. We were both chuckling like, haha, look at all this rain, until it got so bad that we literally couldn't see 1 yard in front of the car. By this point, we were on the freeway and basically trapped. And then we both started getting alerts on the Uber app that we were in a danger zone and to vacate immediately. Then we saw the water rising on the side of the freeway and cars starting to lose control. That's when both of our smiles dropped and it was like, oh yeah, people die in these conditions. We both might not be going home today. It probably sounds silly to people who have to deal with all this stuff all the time, but that was the only time in my life I've experienced the genuine fear of, there's a very real danger I could either drown or be sleeping in a community center this evening. Eventually, he did get me home and I've never been so grateful. He got a big tip from me and a hug. Decided to go on a day hike in a 17,000-acre wilderness area that I'd never visited before. Didn't tell anyone my plans, didn't take a map, didn't pack anything more than a Cliff Bar and a water bottle. There was no cell service and I didn't see anyone else all day. The trail system turned out to be pretty complex, and after a couple of hours I realized I was entirely lost. I tried to keep my panic down and kept just picking trails and walking until around dusk, where I happened to pop out onto a dirt road and was able to follow that road a couple of miles back to my car. I still kick myself for that one. I don't know what the frick I was thinking. At my best friend's going-away party, drunker than I've ever been before or since, barely able to stand, when the bros collectively decided to pick me up and throw me in the pool. All I could do was grab a nearby screen door with one white-knuckled hand. The host is a big burly musclehead who'd just made sergeant. He stopped them and told them they were idiots. I was too drunk to swim, clearly. And then I blacked out. At first, the narrator was confused as to why a screen door was in the pool unless this was some kind of budget Titanic-themed party. Then I realized that you never actually made it to the pool, which in hindsight is probably a very good thing for everyone involved. When I was in med school and did my psych rotation, the first thing we were told was to never split up from our partner, so just in case of a dangerous situation with a patient, we'd have a second person there to help. I went to do an assessment on a patient, he seemed perfectly normal, and my partner judged that now would be a good time to use the restroom. The patient and I were having a pleasant-as-could-be conversation. He asks me to look at his drawings, which he had proudly hung up on the wall. I obliged, I like art as much as the next girl. I look and they're really nice. Then I turn around and find that the second thing we were told never to do, which is let the patient get between us and the doorway, had happened. And he was not seeming so friendly anymore, which is when I thought to myself, well, darn it, if I'm in a pickle now. This man is telling me he has to get out of here. I have to help him. And all of I don't even hear what at this point because I'm realizing how potentially screwed I am. But then I realized that I'd also done the third thing which we were told never to do, which was to keep our cell phones on us on the floor. I was just hoping at this point that I could keep this guy talking a little while I call my preceptor to save my dumb butt. My friend was at the same clinical site the following semester, and the preceptor used that as a cautionary tale to emphasize the first two rules and get rid of the third one. I swam from a beach out to a buoy, not even that far, maybe 200 meters from the beach. I'm a strong swimmer, so I thought I'd manage it easily. Something about the cold water and the current? I don't know, I was really struggling coming back with even trying to swim horizontally to the beach. I went all lightheaded and felt really tired, then just started thinking that this is it, I'm gonna drown, and how stupid I've been. Floated there for a bit, laughed to myself like a maniac about how dumb I was dying like this. Eventually, I snapped out of it and started swimming again. Ended up crawling back onto the beach. My partner asked how the sea was, and I just croaked, "Fine." We were on a patrol in Afghanistan in 2008 when we came under heavy fire. Our fire team took cover behind a low, loose stone and mud wall, unable to return any effective suppressing fire. The wall was slowly getting lower and smaller as it was peppered by small arms fire, and we knew that air support was coming, but it felt like we were in some crappy Indiana Jones scene. In those situations, it's the humor that stops you from crapping yourself. Me and my friend were scaling a cliff. He wanted to go around, which would take about an hour. I said we could climb it. Fast forward 10 minutes and I'm hanging off a cliff, 30 feet tall, and hanging onto it for dear life with two hands. I found the situation quite funny. I was so confident in my ability to climb it, and I lost my footing just as I got to the top. I was holding onto the rock for what felt like forever, most likely less than 2 minutes, until he managed to climb up and pull my butt up there. It was 3 years ago, I believe, when I was still in active service in Switzerland. I'm part of a tank crew. That day I was the designated loader for the cannon. We were doing live fire exercises, and as we fired, one of the gas extractor seals blew up. What this is, basically, is a circular rubber ring around the gas tube of the cannon. If you look up a Leopard A2 tank, it's the thick tube at the base of the cannon. It acts as a seal to prevent smoke backlash into the crew compartment, and instead vents it outside. This meant that the sealed crew compartment filled up with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite and essentially blinded us all. So here I am, a 25-kilo high-explosive shell in my arms that you don't want to drop on the floor, blinded and winded by smoke, thinking, well, this is how I die, apparently. Managed to fumble around, slot the shell back into the carry tray as well as engage the coaxial machine gun fan. It's mounted under the machine gun ejection port, and it pulled the smoke outwards when turned on. And I opened the top hatch to let it cycle out. Fun times. The first World Trade Center bombing. Ground floor, the explosion knocks me to my knees. I thought 2 subway trains had crashed below us. A couple of seconds later, the second explosion. I knew this was going to be a problem. I learned years later there was no second explosion, the tower just rang like a bell. It was the building reverberating back to the original bomb site. Went to work somewhere else not long after that. I was watching Archer on my laptop in college, had my headphones on, and in the episode there was an alarm going off. After about 3 episodes, I finally realized, hey, wait, why can I still hear that alarm? I looked up and saw that the end of my corridor was completely engulfed in flames, and the flames were coming at me quickly. Best part was like 40 people just walked by me after the alarm started and let me sit there. Nobody even bothered to warn me. I didn't take the chicken out of the freezer like she'd asked, and then my mum pulled into the driveway. I hunted wild pigs, or razorbacks, in Australia. Since I was a teenager, they wouldn't give me a rifle. They set a line of teenagers up with long poles and what looked like metal trash can lids to bang and make noise in a line formation.
We stomp forward, pigs run the other way towards the hunters. In theory. Occasionally, a male, the ones with the horns, will have enough testosterone stored in their sacks to charge at us. That's when we're supposed to take the pole and push him away. Yeah, nah. Like 14-year-old idiot me dressed in a leather apron is going to push this 400-pound pork monster off me with a stick. Brown Man here took a trip to Big Bend National Park a few years ago with a bunch of green herb. Got to my campsite in view of the Rio Grande, high as frick, and realized I'm on federal land on the US-Mexico border with a not insubstantial quantity of a regulated substance. I've made a huge mistake. One night when I was in active addiction, I was drinking heavily and also taking a hefty dose of oxycodone. I felt my heart slow down to a crawl and I was having a lot of trouble breathing. Very easily could have died there, but I found it partly comedic in that moment. Don't do substances, kids. Was on a school trip to Austria, skiing. A guy who didn't like me and repeatedly picked on me came into my room with all of his mates and pushed me to a window. I thought it was just a joke until he put a knife to my throat. I instantly stopped laughing. He stared at me for a good 30 seconds and walked out of my room, which didn't have a lock on the door. I didn't sleep that night. That moment when you're gunning it up a hill on an ATV and you're about 90 degrees before the pinnacle and you let off the gas too early because you thought you were going to flip backwards and everything perpetually slows and then goes completely still before the hill crest and it's quiet and you know Newton's law, so you just chuckle and think, well, I guess we're going to roll backwards now and hope for the best. What was the most epic comeuppance you've ever seen a spoilt brat get? I guess the situation is only epic to me because it seems like spoiled kids always win. I took my kids to a children's museum when they were toddlers. There was a specific area for toddlers with a whole grocery store set up. Such is life there. There was an 8 or 9-year-old kid in the toddler area being a pain in the butt. He kept taking all of the other kids' toys, hoarding all of the shopping carts. He'd hand out a few pieces of food to the kids, but mainly wouldn't let them touch or play with anything else. Now, normally I'd let my own awesome kid deal with the situation. He doesn't take crap from anybody. But they started getting into it when this kid got on my son's nerves, and then the older kid hit my son. Done. I went over to the kid, got right up in his face and said, "No, we do not hit, get out." Instant tears. He dropped all of his toys and left the play area. His mum caught the tail end of the scene and tore him a new one. "What is wrong with you? I can't turn around for 2 minutes. Then some other parent has to come in and tell you how to behave?" Unfortunately, too little too late for that one. I played football in the local kids' league. One kid from another team was basically untouchable as his dad was a major sponsor of the league and would donate money for uniforms and drinks and stuff. His son was a pretty good receiver but didn't like getting hit, and his parents made a big deal out of leaving their son alone so he could develop his skills. He was insufferable. Anytime he scored a touchdown, he'd do over-the-top celebrations and mock all of the other players, his teammates included. Then came high school. Most of the kids from the league ended up in one of 2 schools. He went to mine, along with some other players, and during tryouts he did do well. The coaches were mostly focused on skills and minimal contact during the first few rounds of cuts. The final round was when things got interesting. Full contact was permitted and he got rocked over and over again. No one was actually trying to tackle any harder than normal, it's just that this guy didn't know what to do when he got tackled. So he screamed and cried a lot. He didn't make the team. That is until his dad came down to the school and offered to donate money for uniforms and some other goodies for our sports team. So he made the team and again we were told to take it easy on him. So we did, but the other teams didn't. And he went up against some of the players he'd mocked previously. And they remembered. Our quarterback kept passing to him and he was getting repeatedly smashed, over and over again. It was the only time our team cheered for the other team. He quit playing football after that. Spare the rod and you'll spoil the boy. Obviously, the narrator doesn't actually condone corporal punishment of children, but this is maybe one of those very rare scenarios where shielding the kid from the reality of the fact that tackles happen and should be trained for in football is a bad long-term strategy for the kid and his team. Preferential treatment just sort of screws people up most of the time. Oh, I've got a fun one. This one I handled myself. I waited tables in a breakfast diner a few years back. 2 ladies came in and towed one of their kids along. A chubby boy with gold chains and a nice watch. This kid is probably 10 to 11 for reference. Mum is very clearly tired of dealing with him as he's very demanding. Blurts out what he wants before I can say hi, among some other behavioral issues.
Partway through the meal, he holds up his Sprite cup and shakes it at me and utters only the word more. Mum looks aghast and chastises him for being so rude, to which he begrudgingly apologizes. I shrugged and told him, "Don't apologize to me, apologize to your mum." Was a little worried when I came back around with his Sprite and saw his hot, salty tears streaming down his chubby face. Mum left me a $10 tip on the $30 bill, however, so I think she was happy with my service. I went on a bushwalk in Singapore, and there are pretty clear signs around to not feed the monkeys as they can get aggressive. Anyway, there were these two boys around the ages of 8 swearing and throwing sticks and rocks at a little monkey in a tree. The dad was standing there laughing and allowing this to go on. I was about to say something when one of the kids ripped open a bag of Skittles and started throwing them. The monkey immediately ran down the branch, snatched the Skittles, and at the same moment, another 3 monkeys came out of nowhere and in an epic display of monkey justice, swarmed the kids, making them and the dad run away for dear life. I used to work at a women's shelter. Christmas time rolls around and a man and his sourpuss teenaged son come to the door. He says his son would like to donate some items to the kids staying at the shelter. Great! The man and his son started hauling in some expensive items. There was an Xbox, a bunch of games, a flat-screen TV, iPod, cool headset, a few other things. Turns out the kid ran his mouth and the dad made him give everything to the other kids. Christmas was pretty cool for our gang that year. I worked as an outdoor camp instructor. One week I was on logistics and had to drive the van to pick up kids. I'd heard from my friend that one of the kids in his group was a little crapbag, backchatting, being lazy, bullying other kids. When I got to the pickup point, the kids hopped into the van and my mate got in the front seat. He gave me the rundown on the trouble causer. As I started the van up, I did a visual check of seatbelts and everyone was good except for this one kid. I asked and he said no. I told him I can't leave until he puts it on. So he did and I started to leave. A minute down the road, I heard him unclip his seatbelt, so I had to stop the van and ask him again. He put it back on. This happened one more time. On the third time, I just pulled over, turned the van off, I radioed base and asked for my manager and the overseeing teacher who was this kid's dean to come and pick this kid up, because he was a danger to the others in the van. That's when this kid started pleading and begging. I told him no, I already made the call. He got sent home. My mate Mitch had one of his best weeks after this kid left. One time I wouldn't give my daughter a push on the swing because she was whining instead of asking. She knows we don't listen to whining, but her grandpa was there, so she was testing me. When she figured out I really wasn't going to do it, she grabbed the rope from the swing and flung the swing at me. It missed me, came back and smacked her right in the face. I'm sure it hurt too because it was a board with rope through the middle. Not that I'm happy that my kid was hurt over it, but I think it taught her about karma that day. I think I was around 9 or so when I made friends with another kid down the road. It was his grandparents' place and he visited a lot. If I remember correctly, we met through baseball. He was incredibly overweight and bossy. He always made the rules of the games we played and would throw major tantrums if I objected. For instance, while playing with action figures, I had the toy do some cool flips. He went crazy saying how it needed to be realistic. The first time I visited his house, I was blown away by the volume of toys he had. Growing up fairly poor, I was accustomed to having maybe one cool toy. He had all the PlayStation games and a huge collection of anime VHSs. Not surprisingly, his parents were overweight as well, and would make dense dinners that would take me 2 days to recover from. Eventually, one sleepover, he wanted to play wrestle with me. Didn't take but a second to know how bad of an idea that was, with him being more than 100 pounds, especially since he wanted us to be shirtless. I know, right? So I refused and he cried, telling me to take my shirt off and to wrestle. I remember walking out and asking his mum for a ride home. She just gave me the look of, I understand. 2 days later, he showed up to my house asking for me to come out. My brother told him I wasn't home as I walked by the door to the kitchen. He flipped out and that's the last I heard of him. I didn't know you were friends with Eric Cartman. On the first day of a 2-week vacation, I saw my spoiled 10-year-old cousin tell his mother, his older female cousin, his aunt and his grandmother that he wasn't going to clear his place or rinse his dishes because that's woman's work. For the rest of that 2-week vacation, nobody had to lift a finger to clear a plate, rinse a dish or wash a pot because it was his job. At times, there were over a dozen of us there. That's right, ladies, work the misogyny right out of the kid. He's got time to learn, and there's still hope for him as long as these sorts of important lessons are being taught. The narrator probably wouldn't have survived that women's work quote if he had tried that crap growing up. Here at Yukon, they serve special mac and cheese on certain days. I'm sure a lot of schools do it, but our bacon jalapeno mac is pretty damn good. Well, a certain sophomore from a wealthy family who was used to being bailed out of trouble by his rich parents got drunk and decided he wanted some mac and cheese. He was clearly intoxicated and had the brass pair to walk around the food court drinking beer. The manager sees this and won't let him in the food line. As seen in a video someone took, our boy spent the next 10 minutes mercilessly berating the poor guy and his staff for being beneath his station. The manager gives him so many chances to just walk away, but this guy isn't leaving without his mac and cheese. He shoves the manager, not for the first time, and another employee decides he's done with this crap. The hero employee tackles our boy and pins him. The craphead spends the next few minutes pinned to the ground while the cops arrive, screaming, "I'm absolutely fricked!" and he's arrested. Not his first arrest either, and not his first expulsion from college. From what I hear, he's since been arrested or expelled from another school. We'll never forget you, mac and cheese kid. Maybe not the harshest, but it still pleased me. I used to work at a pony camp that catered to rich kids from a very nice neighborhood. We'd have really spoiled kids all the time. While annoying, the most frustrating part was trying to maintain authority just so the little bags of crap don't get themselves crushed by a 1,000-pound animal. Anyway, we had a maybe 10-year-old kid from some mildly famous sportscaster one week. The kid was just awful. She ignored everything we told her and was mean to the other kids in camp. At one point, she started a physical fight with another girl, and when she felt like she was getting beaten, she started yelling, "Don't you know who my mom is? I'm gonna tell her." The other kid got scared and started crying. My coworker replied, "Actually, I do know your mom, and I know she wouldn't like to hear about this. Why don't I call her right now?" The little brat didn't believe her, so my coworker did. She was much easier to deal with for the rest of the week after that. Turns out my coworker worked with her mum many times over the years. She's a professional makeup artist for TV and did her makeup more than a few times. Suck it, you spoiled brat.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I used to work at a non-overnight summer camp and after-school program, and a week-long soccer camp. The town isn't huge, so needless to say, over the few years I got to know several kids from different programs. One 10-year-old boy I knew from after school was a total jerk. Bully, snob, didn't think he had to listen, a tattletale, which is my personal pet peeve. He was just awful. He came to my soccer camp and proceeded to make fun of an 8-year-old girl because she had cleats where he had the newest Nikes and a brand new cool design ball. Unfortunately for him, I also knew this 8-year-old girl and knew that the reason her cleats looked old and worn down is that she was a mother-frickin' beast, just all-around amazing athlete who loved soccer and played hours every day. So I paired him with her for a simple drill where one person started with the ball and you just tried to get past the other person and kick the ball at the other stationary ball or cone about 10 yards away to simulate passing and scoring accurately while under pressure. He was of course angry, saying she was too young and a girl. I said if he hit the cone 3 times, he could pick his own partner. He again pointed out her shoes to me as if that were going to change my mind, before finally giving in and playing. She proceeded to humiliate him over the next few minutes, not once letting him dribble past her in 5 attempts. He was livid, bending down, messing with laces as if the shoes really mattered, and then saying he needed to use his ball. Nothing worked. He was so angry I thought he was going to be violent, but then it was her turn to be on offense. He talked some kind of smack, I forget what, and refused to let her use his ball. She didn't say a word and got a new ball. I blew whistle and she did a step-over fake, which made him move to the side. She stood back up straight and kicked it between his legs and hit the cone. She'd barely even moved, and he was so frickin' angry. Second round, he charged at her, screaming. She kept her cool, wound back like she was going to drill it to his dumb face. He ducked and squealed as she dribbled around him with his hands still covering his head, and she hit the cone. I didn't make her embarrass him for the remaining 3 attempts, and called a water break. This kid was just dumbfounded. He honestly thought his shoes were going to make him better without any effort. He was better behaved the rest of the week, but I honestly think she just broke his spirit. He seemed out of it. I hope he's doing alright. The girl is like an all-American high school soccer player last I checked. Won't be surprised if it's her in the Olympics one day. I was on a flight from Washington Dulles to Heathrow. This 6 to 8-year-old behind me was screaming the whole flight, constantly whining at his mum for food, toys, whatever. Mum was the "shh, honey, no, honey, shh, sweetheart" kind of type of mum. Finally, she had to get up to use the restroom. The kid starts wailing. The guy next to me leaned up in his seat, turned around and said, "Hey, kid, shut the frick up." The whole plane didn't clap, but we enjoyed 5 minutes of dead silence from him until Mum came back. This one was told to me by my parents since I was too young to remember at the time. The neighborhood bus stop for the Catholic high school was on the corner of where our house sits. Sometimes when it was raining, the kids would wait right next to our house for cover. That didn't bother my parents. They had kids. They didn't want someone else's kids standing out in the rain. What did bother them was when they realized the kids started passing the time by ripping up all the flowers around the house. The parents called the school to complain and had a nice chat with the principal. That Saturday, all the kids who used that stop showed up to replant the flowers, which they or their parents paid for. When the flowers were replanted, they got to spend a few more hours helping with our other yard work. Then the school moved their bus stop to the main road on the edge of the neighborhood. That meant about 2 more blocks of walking every day for most of them and waiting in a field with no shelter from the bad weather. That seems like a lot of time and money to invest in punishing what essentially are just dumb idiot kids not thinking their actions through. Then again, even if this group had learned their lesson, the following year's kids might do the same thing, so I guess it was a preventative measure. Was at a family event for my girlfriend of the time. One of her cousin's kids was just running around making a ruckus in spite of the numerous times his parents told him to settle down. Eventually, he took an interest in the motion-activated Glade air freshener on the counter. It had been turned off because it would be spraying non-stop with all the people around. So this little 6-year-old bag of crap is standing on his tiptoes, ignoring the constant warnings of "don't touch that please," and reaching over, pushing buttons, and eventually it happens. Flips the switch to on, and 3 seconds later he gets a direct blast of Glade straight to the face. I worked at Taco Bell in high school. At the time, we had kids' meals. This kid comes in with his parents and orders a kids' meal. Apparently, he had been in recently and already had that toy. He started screaming at me to get him another toy. His dad looked at me with an absolutely dejected look on his face and begged me to get the toy. I dug through the new box of toys and found one. The kid ripped it out of my hands and ran outside, directly into a rose bush. My coworker was legit laying on the ground laughing. I was at the park with my brother's wife and their daughter, my niece, and oversaw the following exchange. A young kid, probably between 5 and 7, was being obnoxious. Every 15 minutes or so, his grandparents, I assume they were his grandparents, they'd gather his toys and bring him over to their bench and put him in timeout for a few minutes. He threw tantrums, but they would completely ignore him when he screamed and calmly asked him if he was finished. Timeout didn't stop until he stopped crying. He'd go back to playing, then get all wound up and end up in timeout again. This happened 3 or 4 times in the hour that we were at the park. Finally, he made a little girl cry by taunting her that she didn't have a certain toy and he did. I think it was a Minecraft thing. The grandparents calmly walked over, took the toy from him, gave it to the little girl, and they left the park. This kid lost his absolute crap the entire time they were heading out. Boy Scout camp out in Utah. Back when the Boy Scouts were pretty much run by the Mormon church, a porcupine walked through our camp and this spoiled rich kid got a stick and chased it up a tree. We all told him to stop. He wouldn't listen. The scout leaders were off doing God knows what at the time, so this porcupine is up in the tree and now the spoiled weenie wants to shoot hard candy at it with his wrist rocket. He can't get a clear shot, so he climbs up the tree and sits on a branch under the porcupine, shoots a hard candy at the porcupine and hits it hard. It was right then that he learned that when a treed porcupine feels threatened, it just lets go and lets the quills break the fall. This big porcupine fell right onto the spoiled kid's shoulder, bounced off, hit his thigh, and then landed on the ground. It waddled away and we just laughed at the now howling, spoiled kid. One of the scout leaders had to drive the kid to an emergency room. I hope the scout leader caught hell for not supervising as well. I went to high school in a super affluent area, and a few years after I graduated, a bunch of kids got busted because a kid paid his tutor for a flash drive with a key swiping code, stole several teachers' passwords, and changed his and his friends' grades in the system. They made an argument in their defense that it wasn't their fault because they were so wealthy and used to being handed things that they didn't know how to work for them. Affluenza and whatnot. They got expelled. They made national news for being arrogant D-bags, and all the other districts in the area argued over who would take them because nobody wanted to. A few years later, my alma mater made national news again when a prom draft ring was exposed, where guys would get together and have a fantasy football-style draft over who got to take whom to prom. It was exposed after a girl complained to administration that she didn't want to go with the guy who picked her in the draft, and the guy threw a tantrum because apparently he had paid off a bunch of people to get first pick, and thus he felt he owned her on prom night. Everyone in the draft was suspended or banned from prom, if I remember correctly. Arrogant rich kids are the worst. I was about 15. I was in the woods with some friends, a local public nature reserve, playing on a rope swing, drinking energy drinks and eating snacks, chatting, just having a good time keeping to ourselves, really. The rope swing itself was on a very tall tree, hanging over what I can only explain as a miniature valley. 2 small hills with a gap in the middle, rope swing on one side, but we'll reach the other side. You get it. Then some other kids came along on their bikes. Maybe between ages 10 and 12, dressed up in tracksuits and quite mouthy. You know the type. They told us to move along from their rope swing. It wasn't theirs. I set that thing up myself because I was like Spider-Man kid back then. I could climb anything. Obviously we said no, but we did say we'll leave it to them for a bit if they want to have a go, because there's no reason we can't all enjoy it. They wouldn't take that answer, so we carried on playing on the rope swing, but then they began throwing sticks and rocks at us. It didn't faze us at first. Next thing, one of them tries to show off and speeds down the hill on his bike to try and grab me while I swing. But his mate throws a stick at the same time and it lodges in his wheel and sends him flying down the hill. To add insult to injury, he flies off right in my swing path and gets 2 knees to the ribs. Completely took the wind out of him, so they all left feeling defeated. It feels good because we did nothing out of order, the cards just kind of worked out for us. How about that kid who tried to get off from killing 4 people in a drunk driving accident by claiming he suffered from affluenza, being too rich to know right from wrong? He was caught after fleeing to Mexico and ended up serving just 2 years in prison. When did you troll law enforcement, and what happened? College town. Huge party. Excise cops are in town busting parties left and right. Ours gets busted. They proceeded, handing out tickets to underage drinkers. One kid gets a scrap of a piece of paper, folds it into the shape of the tickets the cops are handing out, and sits on the front steps with his head in his hands repeating, "My parents are gonna frickin' kill me." And the cops just pass him by. There was a speed trap where I grew up on Pennsylvania Route 74. One of the markers, since it was a VASCAR trap, was a white plastic jug. I often stopped along that route when I saw the jug there, grabbed the jug, and drove off. I got stopped once doing this. The cop seemed really angry. I told him, "I see that thing there all the time, and it really bothers me that no one's bothered to pick up the trash." I was speeding once, and I mean seriously speeding. I saw the lights come up behind me and I freaked out. I pulled over and noticed I had a bottle of water next to me. I took it and poured it all over my lap and put on the most embarrassed look that I could. He asked if I knew why he'd pulled me over, and I responded, "I'm sorry, officer, I really had to pee and I was trying to get to the nearest restroom, but…" And then I made big innocent eyes. I peed myself. Something in me knew that this cop didn't want me to touch his pen, his paper, didn't want to touch my license, nothing. As far as he was concerned, I was just gross. He said, "Well, next time use the bathroom before you go and slow it down," and he let me go. When I was a senior in high school, we got a new vice principal from some inner-city school who thought he was a real hard case. He'd actually go around smelling kids' fingers for the scent of devil's lettuce. My buddy and I came back from lunch one day, both stone-cold sober, and heard Mr. Hardcase, whose real name I forget, he was coming out of the parking lot to check fingers. My friend looked at me, then wedged his right hand down the back of his pants to his butt crack. He left it in there until we saw the VP coming our way, then pulled it out nonchalantly while we waited. Sure enough, the VP walked up and in his usual threatening manner told us to hold out our hands. I did. He smelled my fingers, then moved on to my friend. I could barely keep from losing it as he took a big sniff and then literally jumped backwards, yelling something about my friend needing to wash his damn hands. Needless to say, this ended the finger-smelling technique at my high school. I'm going to say here that personally I think smelling any part of a pubescent child is a pretty terrible idea, even before you consider the gross and pervy side of things. That gross kid probably helped the VP dodge a bullet in the future. Around 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, I was pulled over for suspicion of DWI. I hadn't had a drop. They asked me to step out of the car and gave me a sobriety test, which I passed with flying colors. They asked me if they could search the vehicle, and I told them they could search the vehicle with the sole exception of the center console. They'd need a warrant for that. After several hours of sitting roadside, they finally produced a warrant from a judge. The center console was empty. This was about 10 years ago. My mother had a large plant in a plastic pot that had died. I took the pot full of dirt and put it in the trunk of my car to help replant something at my house. I forgot about it for a few weeks. I got pulled over for something else. The cop asked, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And I said, "Was it the speeding or was it because of the pot in my trunk?" He got me out of the car and had me put my palms on the hood while I was searched. He opened the trunk and wasn't happy. I got chewed out for wasting his time and such. I noticed that not one single car passed, so it wasn't wasting too much of his time. I've never actually done this, but I always wanted to. Get 5 total friends together, all wearing costumes, dress up as a biker, construction worker, Indian, cowboy, and a GI. Then go to a public place where the police walk around and just follow the cop. When my buddy and I were about 16 and stupid as hell, we did a lot of nonsense playing on cops, but this was by far our best. We'd spend a ton of time lurking around grocery and toy stores at 3 a.m., toy stores earlier, obviously, until one of us got an idea looking at an item in a way that it wasn't intended to be used in the way we wanted to use it. Normal hilarity ensued, Vaseline on padlocks, bubbles in fountains, that kind of stuff, but this night was different. We're sitting in the sandwich aisle of our local store and my buddy's eyes lit up. He looks over at me and goes, "Get that peanut butter, the smooth kind." This having been about the 4th year of us doing this, I wasn't 100% sure what he was going to use it with, but I knew not to question it. So I bought 2 of those huge, smooth peanut butter things. We walked outside, crossed the street, and he tells me to rip the seal off the peanut butter and to get some on my fingers and mess up the smooth top. This is where it clicked. We then proceeded to walk absolutely as suspiciously as possible through this little town square. Sure enough, halfway through, we get spotlighted. The cop pulls up, tells us to stop, and we both instinctively put the peanut butter behind our backs, obviously holding something. The cop gets out and the conversation with my friend goes like this. "What have you got there, son?" "Nothing." "What's behind your back?" "Nothing." I couldn't help but giggle a little bit. "Show me your hands." My buddy very slowly puts the peanut butter behind his shoes and socks and shows the cop his hands. "Give me that." "It's mine." The cop reaches behind my friend's feet and grabs this jar of peanut butter. He spins the top off and sees that it's not in pristine shape. Demands to know what's in it. "Peanuts, salt, maltodextrin, red 3. "What did you hide in the peanut butter?" "Nothing." "Then why do you have it?" "Sandwiches." The cop looks at my pal and then back at me, still holding the peanut butter behind my back, and he does it. He shoves his hand and arm into my pal's peanut butter and starts throwing hunks out into the parking lot. And my friend loses it. He went off on a tirade of peanut rights, the peanut rebellion, just harassing us because we're white, peanut civil rights, the peanut pride parade, who doesn't know about the PPP, and on and on. The cop realizes there's nothing in it and turns to me furious. Doesn't say a word, just grabs my peanut butter, almost knocks me over. I tell him Mr. Goodbar's lawyer will hear of this. This guy does the same thing to me, and I launch into a tirade about my working family and our right to sandwiches, and the peanut labor movement and collective bargaining rights and candy power fighting the man, so on and so forth. He figures out what's going on, slams himself back into his car, covered in peanut butter, yells something about us breaking curfew, kinda half chuckling, and tears out. My friend tells him he owes us a sandwich as he drives away. And I thought that was the end of the story, and it was until 5 years ago. I was telling this to my brother's best friend, who I didn't know was the son of the police dispatcher for our town at the time. Apparently, he had to go back and fill out incident paperwork as there was no way to hide this peanut stuff on his steering wheel, car, and uniform. The next day, there was a sandwich on his chair. The day after that, baseball peanuts in his locker. The day after, peanut butter in the showers, and so on and so forth. He still gets peanut-related trolling to this day. In short, trolled a cop with peanut butter that could have had substances in it, but had nothing. Other cops get in on the prank afterwards. I refuted a police noise complaint with a decibel meter and a printout of the Boston Municipal Code on noise ordinance. The best kind of right is technically right. I mean, honestly, that's fantastic. They can't even use the parting shot of just keep it down, because you can point to the decibel meter and say, "We are." Awesome. My friend's story. He was smoking green herb in high school with his best friend. They were both guys. They had to sneak away from their parents, so they smoked in one of their cars at a scenic outlook near Roanoke, Virginia. Sure enough, officers found them in the car, but luckily they'd already finished and put the green stuff away. When the officer asked my friend what he was doing there, the officer suspected what they were doing. My friend said he was in love with the other guy and they were about to make out. The damn southern cop didn't know what hit him, so he just walked away. It was a few days before New Year's in the Bay Area's Chinatown. I was about 14 then, and me and my group of friends would always walk from school to my house just to hang out and play video games. There were about 6 of us walking up this really steep hill to where I lived. When you've lived in the same area for 10 years, you notice things that are unusual, out of place, and just don't seem right. The strange thing I noticed was a guy, late 30s, with sunglasses on and a hat, sitting in a white pickup truck reading a magazine. We were inside my apartment for about 30 minutes before we decided to go get some food. I saw the truck on the other corner and the guy spots us. He rolls down the window and yells, "Do you guys have any fireworks for sale?" I told him I couldn't hear him, but I clearly heard him. He asked again, I said, "Do you guys have any fireworks for sale?" I told him again that I couldn't hear him. All of a sudden, he makes a turn, goes down the hill and pulls right up to us. "Do you guys have any fireworks for sale?" I said, "Nope." And he goes, "I know you guys do. I'm not a cop, so it's cool." I told him that it doesn't matter if he's a cop or not, we don't sell fireworks because it's illegal. He starts to get irritated and starts yelling at us at this point. "Come on guys, stop being wussies. I just want to buy some fireworks for my kids." We're actually walking down the street with him slowly driving next to us, asking. I told him one last time, "I know you're a cop and you're just doing your job, but honestly, we don't sell fireworks. And by the way, a cable car is coming." He goes, "So what?" And I told him, "Because you're going down a narrow one-way street with the cable car coming up the hill towards you." He literally crapped his pants as he could see the cable turn the corner in full speed. He reverses as quickly as he can, clipping a few cars on his way up the hill. A cop on top of the hill sees this and pulls the guy over. The guy gets out of his truck and pulls out his badge to show the other cop that he was undercover. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Okay, so we weren't really intentionally going out of our way to troll them, but it's the closest thing I have. Early in high school, maybe 15 years old, my friends and I are cutting through a church parking lot because there's a trail through the woods on the other side, leading from one of my friends' houses to the others. We all notice the smell of burning green herb while we're near the church, so we're looking around trying to figure out who's smoking. My friend sees someone move inside the church, it's like 1 AM at this point, pretty weird, and goes over to check it out. Soon enough, there's 8 cop cars in the parking lot. As it turns out, someone had tried to break into this church the night before, and the pastor and his entire family were sleeping inside in case they came back. They thought that we were the perps returning. The cops just absolutely didn't believe that we were just passing through, and smelled the same thing that they surely did and were just checking out the situation. They detained us for 60 to 90 minutes looking around the surrounding forestry for our stuff. One of the cops was going around to each entrance to the church to check for signs of attempted entry. At the back door, he found a roach from a joint on a ledge right inside the church. Apparently, it was the pastor's daughter who had been lighting up right out back and quickly put out the joint and left it when she heard her dad yell because he saw us at the front. They wound up letting her off with a warning and gave me and my friends a free ride for the 1 mile to where we were going with their flashing lights on, which was pretty frickin' cool when we were 15. I grew up in a small town, really small. The only way to have any form of entertainment was to drive 30 minutes to the next city to go to the movies and bowling. It just so happens that on the highway halfway between the two cities there was a small town known for being a speed trap. The highway was out of the jurisdiction of the local cops, so what the marshal would do is hide in the between overpasses to catch speeders, force them to pull over into the frontage road, which was in his jurisdiction. Then he'd claim an exaggerated speed. When people asked to see his radar, which is perfectly legal, he claimed he didn't have to because it was illegal. Any claims reported to his superiors seemed to go ignored until he ran into me. Over time, my friends and I had timed his patrols and realized that he patrolled towards the end of the month. One time he'd stopped a friend for excessive speeding. The officer claimed 92 in a 60 zone, which is BS, and then we knew something had to be done. The officer had taken his plate number and claimed to have seen it speeding many different times, and we knew he'd be looking out for it. So I decided to take my phone and rig it up to record the speedometer and get pulled over by the officer. It took a few tries, but I managed to get pulled over by the same officer for doing 70 in a 60 zone, that being a first-time offense. After giving him my license, he went on to claim I was doing at least 85, and giving me the whole bit about how he can't show me the radar, as well as giving me a ticket claiming it was a repeat offense and how I should be put into jail, with all of this being caught on my phone without him noticing. So a few days later, I show up to the courthouse to pay the ticket, and I managed to talk to the mayor of the town and showed him the video of all this. Thanks to me, the officer got fired, and I didn't have to pay a $400 ticket from that D-bag. In my case, the cops trolled us. Huge house party. A once-a-year thing around Christmas, the famous pirate party. Lady wenches and undressed dudes with eye patches everywhere. Drunken freshmen as far as the eye can see. The cops are called, which we anticipated. They showed up and it's two guys in their 30s. One is just tired, end of a long day, and didn't really seem to want to be dealing with this crap show. The other was kind of amused by all the nautical debauchery. When two of the housemates, both over 21, went out to talk to the cops, the more serious cop just says, "Look, just get some of these people out of there. We don't want a scene, so tell them that we won't arrest anyone." The other cop chimes in with his very best pirate voice, "Unless they're scallywags." The first cop facepalms and gives his partner this look that says, "Really, dude?" Everyone cracks the frick up and clears out in a good mood, taking most of the drunken 18-year-olds elsewhere. This is how police should be most of the time. Polis means of the people. You should only have to worry about them resorting to force or intimidation in situations that are dangerous to them. Good job, Pirate Popo. My mother drives a Jeep, which the top is often off on. We pulled up in the fire lane out in front of a bank because my mum's kind of an idiot and she ran inside to use the ATM. I was 15 at the time, and while she's inside, a police officer walks up to the Jeep, sticks his head in the driver's window and says, "Is this your vehicle, son?" To which I replied, "Yes, I sometimes like to park in illegal places and sit in my own passenger seat." He didn't say a word, stood back, crossed his arms and just glared at me. My mum came out about 10 seconds later. He took a look at her and said, "Have a nice day, ma'am," and walked away. Junior year of college, all of my roommates and I were 21 years of age. I was the only one with a car, so I was the only one who always had to go on beer runs. You can say that I look a bit underage for my age and I drove a sportier car. So within the first month of buying alcohol from this one place, I got pulled over 4 times after leaving the liquor store. 4 times. I'm not kidding. I noticed they had no reason to pull me over except for the fact that I looked under 21. The cops did play legally, I guess, by following me until I did something stupid or noticed something broken with my car. License plate light out, took a right turn into the second lane, side view mirror was broken, rolling stop right onto a red light. They made me do a sobriety test once in our busy college street. I got a lot of honks. Well, after completely inspecting my car, I went out again to purchase alcohol. No surprise, I was being followed by cops when I left. I knew that if I drove perfectly, they couldn't pull me over. I drove around the block for about 15 minutes, and I was shocked they were still following me. I eventually hopped onto the highway, got off, and then back on. After about 40 minutes of charades, I was getting thirsty and missing the pregame, so I pulled into my driveway. The cops followed me, waited until I opened my trunk and ran in, and then asked to see my ID for the liquor. I pulled it out with a big grin, and they got in their cars and left. I never got pulled over again, maybe because they finally realized, hey, this idiot is 21. I'm an attorney, and a client was complaining about being followed by the cops every time he was in town. I met him at his house and drove his car one Saturday night. Sure enough, about 5 minutes later, a local cop started following me. I made like 20 turns, all legal, and the cop followed me in every turn. He quit following me when I pulled up into my office parking lot, but I waved as he drove by. I told the client to get a different car, and his problems stopped with bullcrap traffic cops. I told the district attorney what I did, and I got better plea offers for cases where cops were being jerks. A story my troll dad likes to tell is from when he was in dental school at USC in the 70s. The street right next to the building with the dental labs is a really long block, so a lot of people just cross in the middle of the street instead of going to a streetlight. There used to be cops who'd write a lot of jaywalking tickets to people who'd do that. My dad and his friends would make giant water balloon launchers using surgical tubing, and they'd launch water balloons, which they made from dental gloves, at the cop. Once, he saw where they were launching from, but he couldn't get into the building because he didn't have the proper security codes. I work as a paramedic, and often the cops call us out to take someone that's drunk to the hospital. This is really stupid because it just clogs up the ERs and costs all kinds of people unnecessary money. Not to mention the fact that they only call us because they don't want the paperwork of taking someone to jail for such a stupid thing. So we get called out one night around midnight to some guy who's chucked up in the parking lot and was wobbly on his feet. He was pretty damn drunk. Nothing a good night's sleep wouldn't cure though. When we pulled up, who was there but the jerk cop who wrote me a ticket the week before? I told my partner who this was and he took the lead. The cop didn't recognize me. The cop gave us a quick rundown, so we checked the guy out and then this happened. My partner said, "So, what do you want me to do with him?" The cop said, "Take him to the hospital." "Why? There's no medical problem. We're concerned about alcohol poisoning." "Well, I'm not and I have more training than you." "Look, just take him." "No, we really don't operate like that." "Well, he needs to go sober up." My partner asks the patient, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" The guy says no. "See, I can't force him." "Well, he can't stay here in the parking lot." "Oh, I see the problem now." The cop's face lights up. "Yeah?" "Yeah, he's your problem. We don't take drunks for just being drunk." The cop looks stunned and then turns to me hoping for a different answer. He still doesn't recognize me. I said, "Maybe you can just give him a ticket." Then the fire captain got in the cop's face and threatened to get his supervisors out of the scene to adjust the officer's attitude, saying things like, "You don't talk to my medics like that." The fire department has that kind of clout here. We left and I giggled for a few days afterwards. I live right outside of my city's limits, which means I'm right outside of the local police department's jurisdiction. In high school, my friends and I would always hang out at my house, so one night we all decided to go to the local McDonald's to raid the dollar menu. We were riding through town, not causing too much trouble. We got our feast and were heading back to my house when we realized there's a cop following us. Now, we're playing music loud enough for it to be heard, but still quiet enough not to be noise pollution. We were also going a few miles over the speed limit like most people did. I guess the officer realized we were leaving the city limit and wanted to catch us before we got away. We were literally 100 feet away from the city limit sign and 400 feet from my driveway when he put on the sirens. Instead of pulling off the road right there in the traffic, I just drove into my driveway and the officer pulls right in behind me. My friends and I get out of the car and the officer pulls his weapon and tells us to get on the ground. My mum and stepdad come running out of the house to straighten the officer out. Chaos ensues and the officer fires a warning shot. This scared the neighbor and they called the sheriff's office and asked for a unit to come. Now it turns out that the local police department and the sheriff's department really don't like each other. A sheriff shows up to respond to the neighbor's call and ends up ticketing the police officer for trespassing and disturbing the peace. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.